The bus stop sat at the edge of nowhere, where the paved road gave up and became dirt. Clara stepped off into dust that hadn't seen rain in weeks, carrying everything she owned in two battered suitcases held together with rope. 42 years old, no references worth mentioning, and a teaching certificate from a college that had closed down 3 years after she graduated. The driver didn't say goodbye, just pulled the door shut and left her standing there. She'd seen the ad in a newspaper someone had left on a diner counter in Billings. Housekeeper needed, remote ranch, 7 children, room and board. Must be resilient. The word must had been underlined 3 times. No mention of pay, no phone number, just an address and instructions to arrive on the first Tuesday of the month. Clara had called it fate. Her sister had called it desperation. Both were right. The ranch house appeared as she crested the hill, and her first thought was that it looked like something trying to disappear. Gray wood weathered to the color of old bone. Windows that caught the sun wrong, reflecting nothing. A porch that sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Beyond it, fields stretched out in every direction. Brown grass, scattered cattle that looked too thin, and a horizon that seemed to eat the sky. A truck sat in the driveway, rusted orange, one door a different color than the rest. As Clara approached, a man emerged from the barn. Tall, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to arrange itself into anything resembling welcome. His shirt was buttoned wrong. "You the woman from the ad?" His voice sounded like he hadn't used it in a while. Clara Whitlock. He looked her over without bothering to hide it. Too old, his expression said. Too soft. Too everything this place would break within a week. James Whitlock. No relation, I guess. Not unless you've got family in Nebraska. Don't have family anywhere. He said it flat, like a statement of geography. You know what you're signing up for here? 7 children, cooking, cleaning, basic education. The ad was pretty clear. The ad was pretty incomplete. James walked past her toward the house, expecting her to follow. Wife died 16 months ago. Cancer. Kids are... He stopped, seemed to lose the sentence. They're not what you'd call easy. The front door stuck. He had to put his shoulder into it. Inside smelled like a place where people had stopped trying. Dishes in the sink, laundry in piles, a fine layer of dust on everything. The living room held furniture that had been nice once, before grief had settled over it like ash. A photograph sat face down on the mantel. Clara could see the corner of the frame, the way the glass had cracked. Kids are at school. Bus brings them back at 3:30. James moved through the house like he was visiting it, not living in it. Oldest is 14, youngest is 4. Between that is, well, you'll meet them. He showed her to a room off the kitchen, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. The window looked out at the barn, and beyond that, nothing. Meals 3 times a day. Keep the place clean. Make sure they do their homework. Don't let them kill each other. He paused in the doorway. Previous woman lasted 2 weeks. One before that made it 5 days. What happened to them? They left. James met her eyes for the first time, and Clara saw something move in them. Not quite a warning, more like an apology he didn't know how to deliver. Nobody stays. He was gone before she could respond, his truck rattling down the driveway in a cloud of dust that took minutes to settle. Clara set her suitcases on the bed and looked around the room that was now hers. A cross-stitch on the wall said, "Home Sweet Home," in letters that had faded to the color of weak tea. Someone had tried to make this place warm once. Someone had failed. The kitchen was worse up close. Dishes crusted with food from days ago, a trash can overflowing. The refrigerator held expired milk, half a loaf of bread going green, and condiments that had separated into layers of oil and sediment. Clara rolled up her sleeves. She'd been scrubbing for 2 hours when she heard it. The sound of the school bus, then voices. Children's voices, but wrong somehow. Too quiet. Too careful. They came in one by one, stopping short when they saw her. The oldest was a girl, 14 like James had said, with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She held a stack of textbooks against her chest like a shield. Behind her, 3 boys ranging from maybe 12 down to 8, each one watching Clara with the same expression. Not curiosity, not welcome. Wariness. Like she was something they'd seen before and knew better than to trust. A girl around 6 clutched a lunchbox shaped like a cat, and in the doorway, barely visible, a small boy with a thumb in his mouth and eyes that had seen too much. "I'm Clara. Your father hired me." The oldest girl's jaw tightened. "Where's Dad?" "Out. He said he'd be back for dinner. He says a lot of things." The girl moved past her toward the stairs. "Come on." The children followed her like ducklings, single file, not looking at Clara. The smallest boy paused, studying her with those two old eyes. "You gonna leave too?" The question hit harder than it should have. Clara crouched down, meeting him at eye level. "What's your name?" "Thomas." "Well, Thomas, I'm not planning on going anywhere. They all say that." He said it matter of fact, like he was explaining the weather. Then he followed his siblings upstairs, and Clara heard doors closing, locks clicking. She stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of a family that had stopped functioning, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Dinner was a disaster. She'd found chicken in the freezer, pasta in the pantry, managed to cobble together something that resembled a meal. But when she called them down, they appeared like ghosts, silent, watchful, taking their seats without a word. James came in last, dirt on his hands, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Everyone, this is Clara. She'll be staying with us." No one responded. The oldest girl, Sarah, Clara learned from the way her father said Sarah passed the salt, served herself without looking up. The others followed her lead. Clara tried. "So, what grade are you all in?" Silence. "Thomas, what did you do at school today?" The boy looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at her plate. James cleared his throat. "They're not used to—" He stopped. "Just give it time." But time felt like a luxury Clara wasn't sure she had. She could feel it already, the weight of this house, the way it pressed down on everything inside it. The way these children had learned to make themselves small, to move through space without taking up any of it, to survive by becoming invisible. After dinner, Sarah stood. "I'll do dishes." I do dishes." Not rude, not exactly, just final. Clara watched her work, mechanical and efficient, rinsing each plate 3 times before setting it in the rack. The girl's shoulders were hunched, her movements practiced. How many nights had she stood here, washing dishes while her father disappeared into grief and her siblings scattered to their rooms? "How old were you when your mother died?" Sarah's hand stopped. For a moment, Clara thought she'd pushed too far, too fast. Then, 13, she got sick fast. 3 months from diagnosis to— The word wouldn't come out. Dad fell apart. Someone had to keep things running. That's a lot for anyone to carry. Yeah, well. Sarah turned the water off, dried her hands on a towel that had holes in it. You'll be gone by the end of the week anyway. They all are. She left Clara alone in the kitchen, and for the first time since arriving, Clara felt something beyond determination. She felt anger. Night came hard to the ranch. No streetlights, no ambient glow from neighboring houses, just darkness that pressed against the windows like something living. Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house settle around her. Footsteps overhead, a toilet flushing, someone crying, the sound quickly muffled. She'd been hired to cook and clean, to maintain basic order, but that wasn't what these children needed. They needed someone to look at them and see more than the wreckage left behind. They needed someone to stay. The next morning started before dawn. Clara woke to the sound of Sarah in the kitchen, already making breakfast, cereal in bowls, milk poured with mechanical precision. The girl froze when she saw Clara in the doorway. I got it. I can see that. Clara moved to the coffee pot. But maybe I could help. Don't need help. Didn't say you did. But there's 7 of you and 1 of me, and I'm pretty sure my job description includes breakfast. Sarah's hands tightened on the milk carton. You don't know anything about us. You're right, I don't. Clara poured coffee into a mug that said, World's Best Mom, with a crack through the middle. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving because things are hard. Everyone leaves when things are hard. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Clara could have argued, could have made promises. Instead, she said, Your mom must have been something special, to raise a daughter who could hold a family together at 13. Sarah's face did something complicated, crumpling and hardening at the same time. She set the milk down hard enough to slosh, grabbed her backpack, and was out the door before Clara could say anything else. The school bus came and went. The house fell silent again. Claire spent the day excavating. Not just cleaning, but uncovering, finding signs of the life this family had lived before grief moved in. Drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets dated 2 years ago. A science fair ribbon for third place. Photographs in frames that had been turned to face the wall. She turned them back around. A woman smiled out from the glass, dark hair, kind eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. The children clustered around her, younger versions of themselves. Happy. Whole. You shouldn't touch those. Clara spun. One of the middle boys stood in the doorway. David, she thought his name was. 10 years old, with his mother's eyes and his father's way of standing, like he expected bad news. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Dad doesn't like seeing her. David moved closer, studying the photograph like it was evidence. Says it hurts too much, but His voice cracked. I don't want to forget what she looked like. Clara's throat tightened. You won't forget. How do you know? And there it was. The question beneath the question. How do you know anything gets better? How do you know we'll be okay? Because you loved her. That doesn't just go away. David wiped his eyes fast, angry at the tears. The other ladies who came, they tried to be her, tried to make everything normal again, but it's not normal. It's never going to be normal. No, it's not. Clara sat down at the table, gestured for him to join her. Normal's gone, but maybe you can find something else. Not better, not the same, just different. Different sucks. Yeah, most of the time it really does. He almost smiled. Almost. The days began to develop a rhythm, fragile and uncertain. Clara learned the patterns, Sarah's rigid control, David's quiet grief, the middle boy's constant fighting, the younger girl's nightmares, Thomas's refusal to speak unless absolutely necessary, and James, always at the edges, working until exhaustion took him under. She started small. Better meals, clean laundry that actually got folded, homework help that the kids tolerated, then slowly began to accept. She didn't try to be their mother, didn't try to fix what was broken, just showed up every day, even when they tested her. And they tested her. The twins, Marcus and Matthew, 8 years old and identical in face but opposite in everything else, started it. Frogs in her bed, salt in the sugar bowl, her shoes hidden in increasingly creative places. Clara didn't yell, didn't threaten, just looked at them with the kind of tired patience that seemed to confuse them more than anger would have. You done? Marcus, the ringleader, crossed his arms. You gonna leave now? Nope. Why not? Everyone else did. Maybe I'm stubborn. Or stupid. Probably both. She handed them a bucket and rags. Bathroom needs cleaning. You two are on it. That's not fair. Neither were the frogs. Get moving. They went, muttering, but they went, and that night there were no frogs in her bed. Progress came in inches. Sarah stopped doing everything herself, letting Clara take over dinner preparations. David started lingering in the kitchen after school, talking about his day in fragments and half sentences. The younger ones, Emma and Thomas, began to exist in the same room as her without looking like they were waiting for her to disappear. But the house remained heavy with absence, with the weight of a woman who should have been there and wasn't. 3 weeks in, Clara found James in the barn after midnight. He was just sitting there, on a hay bale, staring at nothing. Kids are asleep. She didn't ask permission to join him, just sat. They actually go to bed when you tell them to? Eventually, with negotiation. James almost laughed. Almost. Sarah used to fight bedtime every night. Katie, my wife, she had this whole routine, songs and stories, and... He stopped. I don't know how to do this without her. You're doing it. Not well, maybe, but you're here. You're trying. I'm failing. He said it simply, like a fact. I look at them and I see her in every one of them, and it's like losing her 7 times over, every single day. Clara didn't have an answer for that. Didn't have anything except the truth. They need you, not perfect, just present. I don't know how. Then learn. Start tomorrow. Start tonight. She stood, brushed hay from her jeans. Because right now, Sarah's raising 6 kids and running a household at 14. David's holding grief so tight he can barely breathe. Those twins are destroying things because it's the only control they have. And Thomas, her voice caught. Thomas asked me yesterday if his mom left because he was bad. James's head came up. What? He's 4 years old and he thinks he killed his mother. Jesus. James stood, swayed a little. I didn't know. How could you? You've been drowning. He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw something shift in his face. Recognition, maybe. Or shame. Why are you still here? Why haven't you run like the others? Because someone needs to stay. Because those kids deserve better than people who give up on them. She paused. Because I don't have anywhere else to be. And at least here, I matter. It was more honesty than she'd meant to give, but there it was, hanging in the dusty air between them. James nodded slowly. Okay. Tomorrow. I'll try. Good. She left him there, walked back to the house under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. Inside, a light was on in the kitchen. Sarah sat at the table, textbooks spread out, falling asleep over calculus. Hey, you should be in bed. Sarah jerked awake. I have a test. You'll fail it if you're dead on your feet. Come on. I can't just... Yes, you can. Clara closed the textbook. The world won't end if you're not perfect for one day. You don't understand. If I don't keep everything together, it all falls apart. No, it doesn't. That's not your job. Then whose job is it? Sarah's voice rose. Dad's? He can barely get out of bed. Yours? You'll leave just like the others, so it's mine. It's always been mine. Not anymore. You can't come in here and pretend to fix us. I'm not trying to fix you. You're not broken. Clara sat down across from her. You're 14 years old and you've been carrying the weight of this family for 16 months. That's not sustainable. That's not fair, and your mother wouldn't have wanted it. Sarah's face crumpled. Don't talk about her. You didn't know her. You're right, but I know you, and I know you're drowning. The tears came then, finally. Sarah folded forward over her textbooks and sobbed. Harsh, ugly sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep and old. Clara moved around the table, put a hand on the girl's shoulder, and just waited. When the crying slowed, Sarah whispered, I'm so tired. I know. I can't do this anymore. You don't have to, not alone. Sarah looked up, face blotchy and wet. Promise you won't leave. It was the one thing Clara couldn't promise. Not really, not with certainty, but she said it anyway. I promise. The next morning, something shifted. Small, almost imperceptible, but there. James came to breakfast, sat with his children, asked about their days. It was stilted and awkward, and none of them knew quite how to navigate it, but it was something. Clara watched from the kitchen, flipping pancakes, and felt the first hint of hope. It didn't last. The woman arrived on a Thursday, driving a car too nice for the dirt roads, wearing clothes too clean for a ranch. She knocked on the door with the kind of authority that expected immediate answers. Clara opened it, still in her apron, flour on her hands. Can I help you? The woman looked her over with undisguised distaste. I'm Margaret Fletcher. I'm here to see James Whitlock. The name meant nothing to Clara, but the tone meant everything. This was someone used to being obeyed. He's out in the north pasture. Can I take a message? No, you cannot. Margaret stepped inside without invitation, surveying the house with narrowed eyes. Who are you? Clara Whitlock, the housekeeper. I see. Something in her expression sharpened. And how long have you been employed here? About a month? Interesting. James didn't mention hiring anyone new. She moved through the living room, touching things, the clean surfaces, the straightened photographs. Things look different. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, went pale. Mrs. Fletcher. Sarah, darling, don't you look well? The words were warm, the voice was not. I've come to discuss some concerns with your father. Business matters, you understand. Sarah came down slowly, positioning herself between Margaret and Clara. Dad should be back soon. Then I'll wait. Margaret settled onto the couch like she owned it. In the meantime, perhaps you and I can have a chat. It's been too long. Clara caught the look of panic on Sarah's face, the way the other children had frozen in doorways. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. Actually, Clara said, we were just about to start afternoon lessons. Maybe you could come back. I don't think you understand your position here, Miss Whitlock. Margaret's smile was sharp. This family has been under my care since Katie passed. I've ensured they had everything they needed: food, supplies, financial support. I'm something of a guardian angel, you might say. Is that so? It is, which means I have a vested interest in their well-being and in who has access to them. The threat was implicit but clear. Clara felt the children watching, waiting to see what she'd do. Run, like the others? Back down? Disappear? Then you must be pleased to see them doing better, eating proper meals, keeping up with schoolwork, looking less like they're just surviving and more like they're living. Margaret's expression froze. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm sure you do. The sound of the truck saved them. James came in through the back door, stopped short when he saw Margaret. What are you doing here? Visiting, making sure your family is managing. She stood, smoothed her skirt. We need to discuss your account at the store and several other matters, privately. James's jaw worked. Kids, upstairs. They scattered. Clara stayed. That includes you, Miss Whitlock. It's fine, Clara. James looked exhausted. I've got this. Clara went, but not far. Just to the kitchen, where she could hear every word. You can't keep doing this, James. The debt you owe me is substantial, and now you've hired help without consulting me? Using money you don't have? I'm managing. You're drowning. This ranch is falling apart. Those children need stability, not some drifter you picked up from... Watch it. I'm trying to help you. I've always tried to help you, but you make it so difficult. Her voice softened, turned almost kind. Katie would want better for her children. You know that. Silence. Then, what do you want, Margaret? I want what's best for this family. And right now, that means making some changes, starting with letting this Clara woman go. She's unsuitable. She's the first person who's made any difference around here in over a year. She's temporary. They always are. And when she leaves, those children will be hurt again. Is that what you want? Claire's hands tightened on the counter. She could walk in there, defend herself, but this wasn't about her. This was something older, deeper, something that had started long before she arrived. The conversation continued, threats disguised as concern, manipulation wrapped in care. Margaret owned the general store in town, apparently, held credit for half the ranchers in the county, and had been helping the Whitlock family in ways that sounded increasingly like control. When she finally left, the house felt lighter. James stood in the middle of the living room, looking like a man who'd just lost a fight. How much of that did you hear? Enough. Clara emerged from the kitchen. Who is she really? Katie's older sister. She took it hard when Katie died, harder than anyone. She'd been... He stopped. She has a way of making herself necessary, essential, until you can't breathe without permission. She threatened me. Yeah, she does that. James sat down heavily. Look, if you want to go, I understand. Margaret has influence in this town. She can make things difficult. Clara thought about it. Really thought about it. The smart move was to leave, find another job, another family, somewhere easier. Somewhere without whatever toxic dynamic was playing out here. But upstairs, 7 children were listening, waiting to see if another adult would prove them right, would disappear when things got complicated. I'm staying. James looked at her. You don't know what you're signing up for. Probably not. But those kids need someone who won't run. And apparently, that's me. For the first time since she'd arrived, James Whitlock smiled. It was small, tired, barely there, but it was real. Okay then, let's see how long we can last. Clara went upstairs, found all 7 children crammed into Sarah's room, pretending they hadn't been listening. She gone? Marcus asked. For now. She'll come back, Sarah said quietly. She always comes back. Then we'll deal with it, together. Thomas pushed through his siblings, stood in front of Clara with his too serious eyes. You really not leaving? Clara crouched down. I really not leaving. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, like a contract had been signed, like she'd just promised something she couldn't possibly guarantee but had to anyway. That night, dinner was louder. The twins told a story about school that involved frogs and their teacher's reaction. Emma laughed, actually laughed, high and bright. David helped Clara clear the table without being asked. Sarah sat back and let someone else handle things, just for a moment. James stayed for the whole meal, contributed to the conversation, looked at his children and seemed to actually see them. It was fragile, temporary, the kind of good moment that could shatter with a breath, but it was something. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Clara stood in the yard under that impossible sky. The house behind her was quiet now, settled into sleep. She'd been here 5 weeks, longer than the woman before her, longer than she'd stayed anywhere in years. Somewhere in town, Margaret Fletcher was making plans. Clara could feel it, the way you feel a storm coming. But tomorrow, she'd still be here. The kids would come down to breakfast and find her in the kitchen. James would remember that trying was an option. The house would be a little less heavy with grief. One day at a time. One meal, one conversation, one small victory over the crushing weight of loss. Clara looked at the barn, the fields, the horizon eating the stars. This place was dying. This family was broken, but not dead, not yet. And as long as she was here, she'd fight like hell to keep it that way, even if she had no idea what she was fighting against, even if the odds were stacked higher than she could see, even if staying meant war, because these children deserved someone who wouldn't leave when the leaving got easy. And Clara Whitlock had never been good at easy. She went inside, locked the door, and went to bed in her small room with its faded cross-stitch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Margaret would escalate. The town would take notice. Nothing about this would get simpler. But tonight, 7 children slept a little easier. And sometimes that had to be enough. Margaret Fletcher didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. The silence should have been a relief, but Clara knew better. She'd seen women like Margaret before, the kind who didn't lose gracefully, who took opposition as a personal insult that required correction. The correction started small. A week after Margaret's visit, Clara drove into town for supplies. The general store sat on Main Street, a brick building that had probably been there since the town was founded. Bell over the door, wooden floors worn smooth by a century of feet, shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to work gloves. Margaret stood behind the counter like a queen on a throne. Clara, how unexpected. Her smile was all teeth. I wasn't sure you'd still be around. Still here. Clara set her list on the counter. Need to pick up a few things. Margaret took the list, studied it with the kind of attention usually reserved for legal documents. Quite a bit here: flour, sugar, coffee, canned vegetables. Feeding an army, are we? 7 kids eat a lot. I imagine they do. Margaret began pulling items from the shelves, moving with deliberate slowness. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation, about what's best for the Whitlock family. Clara didn't respond, just waited. James has been a valued customer for years, since before Katie passed. I've extended him considerable credit during his difficult time. She set a bag of flour on the counter, hard enough to raise dust. But credit isn't infinite, and with an additional mouth to feed, expenses have increased. I'm working for room and board, no salary. Still, food costs money, resources are limited. Margaret rang up each item with exaggerated care. That comes to $73.42. Clara pulled out the cash James had given her. It was supposed to cover 2 weeks of supplies. Margaret's total was at least $20 more than it should have been. That seems high. Prices have gone up. Inflation, you understand. Everything costs more these days. Margaret's expression didn't change. Will that be a problem? Clara counted out the money, knowing that arguing would accomplish nothing. But she made note of each inflated price, each item that cost twice what it should have. This wasn't about money. This was about power. I'll need to put the rest on James's account. Of course. Though I should mention, his balance is getting quite substantial. I'd hate for things to become uncomfortable. Clara loaded the supplies into the truck, aware of Margaret watching from the store window. The message was clear. Stay, and things would get expensive. Stay, and James would pay for it. She drove back to the ranch thinking about leverage, about the ways people with power used it, about how small-town control worked when you owned the only store for 40 miles. James was in the barn when she got back, fixing a fence post that had rotted through. He looked up as she approached, read something in her face. What happened? Margaret happened. She overcharged by at least $20, then made sure I knew your credit was running out. James drove the post into the ground with more force than necessary. She's trying to starve us out, can't evict us from our own land, but she can make it impossible to survive on it. Is there another store? Another option? Next town's 60 miles. By the time you factor in gas, it's not cheaper. He wiped sweat from his forehead. She's got us boxed in. Then we find another way. There is no other way. That's the point. James sat down on a hay bale, defeated. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should just sell, take the kids somewhere easier. You don't mean that. Don't I? Look around, Clara. This place is dying, has been since Katie got sick. I'm drowning in debt, the cattle are barely profitable, and now Margaret's turning the screws. He laughed, bitter. What am I even fighting for? Clara sat down next to him, choosing her words carefully. Those kids in there. That's what you're fighting for. You think moving will fix things? You think running away from Margaret Fletcher will make them whole again? At least they'd eat. They're eating now. We'll figure this out. How? He turned to face her. You got a magic solution I don't know about? She didn't. Not yet. But sitting there in the barn, looking out at land that had been in James's family for 3 generations, Clara felt something shift. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about refusing to be controlled. We start by not playing her game. She wants us dependent on her store. We find other sources. Grow more of our own food. Hunt. Trade with neighbors. Neighbors don't want to cross Margaret. She holds paper on half of them, too. Then we find the ones who don't care. The ones who are tired of being under her thumb. Clara stood, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. You said it yourself. She's got half this county in debt. That means half this county has a reason to want her influence reduced. James looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. You're talking about going to war with the most powerful woman in 3 counties. I'm talking about not letting her win. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, something changed in his expression. Not quite hope, too cautious for that, but possibility. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the stupidest. Probably both. That night at dinner, Clara brought it up carefully. The kids needed to know what they were facing, but she didn't want to scare them. Sarah, at least, deserved the truth. Mrs. Fletcher is making things difficult. The store prices are going up, and we need to start thinking about alternatives. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What kind of alternatives? Growing more vegetables. I noticed there's space for a garden out back. Maybe we could raise chickens, get fresh eggs. Mom used to have a garden, Emma said quietly, before she got sick. Then maybe we bring it back. Make it bigger, better. Clara looked at each of them. I'm not going to lie to you. Things are going to get harder before they get easier. Mrs. Fletcher wants me gone, and she's willing to make life difficult to make that happen. But I'm not leaving, so we adapt. Why does she hate you so much? David asked. You didn't do anything to her. James cleared his throat. It's not about Clara, it's about control. Margaret's been running things her way for a long time. She doesn't like being challenged. She's a bitch, Marcus muttered. Marcus! Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Well, she is. Always coming around, pretending to care, but really just making sure we know she's in charge. No one corrected him this time. Even James looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. The next morning, Clara started digging. The plot out back was overgrown with weeds, the soil packed hard from neglect. But underneath, it was good earth, rich and dark. She worked through the heat of the day, clearing, turning, making rows. Emma appeared around noon with a glass of water. "Can I help? You know how to garden?" Mom taught me, before." She knelt down, started pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. She said growing your own food made you free. That if you could feed yourself, nobody could control you. Clara paused, looking at this small girl with her mother's wisdom. "Your mom was smart." "Yeah." Emma's voice wobbled. She was. They worked together in comfortable silence until Sarah came out, still in her school clothes, looking at the emerging garden like it was a ghost. "I can't believe you're doing this." "You want to help or criticize?" Sarah surprised her by kneeling down and joining in. Then David appeared, then the twins, then even Thomas with his small hands and serious face. By sunset, they'd cleared half the plot and started planting seeds Clara had managed to buy from a farm supply store 2 towns over, away from Margaret's reach. James came out as the light was fading, stared at his children working the earth together, and something in his face broke open. "Katie would have loved this." "Then let's do it for her," Clara said. The garden became a daily ritual. Every evening after school, the kids would spend an hour watering, weeding, checking for growth. It gave them something to focus on beyond grief, beyond fear. It gave them purpose. But Margaret wasn't finished. 2 weeks after the garden started showing green shoots, Clara went to town for feed, not for Margaret's store. She'd found a farmer willing to sell directly, a grizzled man named Hank who'd told her quietly that he was tired of Margaret's games too. She was loading bags into the truck when a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The deputy who emerged was young, uncomfortable, holding a piece of paper like it might bite him. "Ma'am? You Clara Whitlock?" Her stomach dropped. "Yes. I need you to come with me. There's been a complaint filed." "What kind of complaint?" "Child endangerment, neglect. Someone reported that the Whitlock children are living in unsafe conditions." Clara's blood went cold. "That's a lie." "I'm sure it is, ma'am, but I still need to check it out. Protocol." He shifted his weight. "You can follow me to the ranch, or we can do this the hard way." She followed, mind racing. This was Margaret's move. Can't starve them out, accuse them of abuse, get the children taken away, and James would crumble. The ranch would fail. Margaret would win. 3 cars were already at the ranch when they arrived. Child Services, another deputy, and Margaret's gleaming sedan. James stood in the yard, face pale, fists clenched. The children clustered behind him, terrified. A woman in a blazer approached Clara. "Miss Whitlock? I'm Linda Chen from Child Protective Services. We've received allegations of neglect. I need to inspect the home and interview the children." "This is harassment. Those kids are fine." "Then you have nothing to worry about." Linda's voice was professional, but not unkind. "The sooner we complete the inspection, the sooner we can close the case." Margaret stood by her car, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. She caught Clara's eye and smiled. The inspection took 2 hours. Linda went through every room, took notes, photographed everything. The house was clean. Clara had made sure of it. The children were healthy, well-fed, clothed properly. There was nothing to find because there was nothing wrong. But Linda's face remained carefully neutral as she interviewed each child separately. Sarah went first, spine straight, answering every question with the kind of precision that came from fear. Then David, then the twins, then Emma, then Thomas. When Thomas came out, his eyes were red. He ran straight to Clara, buried his face in her stomach. "They asked if you hit us, if we were scared of you." Clara's vision tunneled. She looked at Margaret, who was examining her fingernails like this was all terribly boring. Linda emerged last, closed her notebook. "I need to speak with Mr. Whitlock and Miss Whitlock, privately." They went inside. Linda sat at the kitchen table, looked between them. "The children are obviously well cared for. The home is clean, there's plenty of food, they're attending school regularly and performing adequately." She paused. "However," Clara's chest tightened. "Several of the children mentioned that you're not their legal guardian, Miss Whitlock, that you're employed as a housekeeper. In cases like this, we typically require that anyone living with minor children undergo a background check. I'll do it, whatever you need. It takes time, 4 to 6 weeks usually, during which—" Linda looked genuinely regretful. "I'm required to recommend that you not be left alone with the children unsupervised." "You're joking." I'm sorry, it's policy. Someone filed a complaint and we have to follow through. Once your background check clears, this all goes away. But until then, Clara can't do her job. James finished, his voice hollow. Can't care for the kids while I'm working. Can't be here without supervision. I can recommend resources. Temporary childcare options, after-school programs. That costs money we don't have. Linda stood. I understand this is difficult, but my job is protecting children. And right now, that means following protocol. She handed James a card. Call me if you need anything. I'll expedite the background check as much as possible. She left. The deputies left. Margaret left last, pausing to speak to James just loud enough for Clara to hear. This could all go away, you know, if certain changes were made, if unsuitable influences were removed. Get off my property. Margaret's expression hardened. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be, for everyone. She looked at the children watching from the window, especially for them. Then she was gone, leaving silence and rage in her wake. Clara stood in the kitchen, shaking. She planned this. Every move, back us into a corner, make it impossible for me to stay. So what do we do? I don't know. And for the first time since arriving, Clara felt the weight of how far in over her head she was. This wasn't just about cooking and cleaning anymore. This was about navigating systems designed to protect children being weaponized to destroy them. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Is Clara leaving? No, James said it firmly, but things are going to be complicated for a while. They asked me if I felt safe. Sarah's voice was small. I said yes. I said Clara takes care of us better than anyone has since Mom died. I said I wanted her to stay. What did they say? Nothing, just wrote it down. She looked at Clara. I told the truth. Did I mess up? No, sweetheart, you did exactly right. But as the kids scattered back to their rooms, Clara wasn't sure that was true. The truth didn't matter when someone with enough power decided to rewrite it. That night, James sat at the table while Clara made tea neither of them wanted. I can't afford childcare, can't afford to stop working, can't afford to keep fighting Margaret. He put his head in his hands. Maybe I should just... Don't say it. She wins. That's what you're not saying. She wins and we lose, and I have to choose between my pride and my children's stability. Clara sat down across from him. There's another option. I'm listening. We make her influence irrelevant. She controls the store. We stop needing it. She controls credit. We find other income. She uses the system against us. We make sure the system sees the truth. You're talking about surviving completely outside her reach. That's possible. Hard, but possible. Clara pulled out paper, started making notes. The garden's already producing. In 2 months, we'll have vegetables. We can preserve them, can them, store for winter. Hank says he'll sell us chickens cheap. That's eggs and eventually meat. There's deer in the woods. You hunt? Used to, before. Start again. We need protein, and we need to stop buying it from Margaret's store. She was writing faster now, ideas building on each other. Trading. There have to be other people who need things, who have things. We create a network outside her control. James stared at her. You're serious? Completely. She wants to make staying impossible. We make leaving unnecessary. This is insane. Probably. But what's the alternative? He didn't have one. Neither did she, really. But sitting there in the kitchen of a house that had seen too much loss, planning an impossible resistance against an enemy with every advantage, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was fighting for something that mattered. The background check took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of James rearranging his entire work schedule, of Sarah once again shouldering responsibilities she shouldn't have to carry, of Clara being present but unable to actually help the way she wanted to. 6 weeks of Margaret making sure everyone in town knew about the investigation, about how the Whitlock children were at risk, about how Clara was under suspicion. But in those 6 weeks, other things happened too. Hank delivered 12 chickens and a rooster. Emma named every single one and took responsibility for feeding them, collecting eggs with a pride that made her stand taller. The garden exploded. Tomatoes, squash, green beans, lettuce, more than they could eat. Clara started preserving, teaching Sarah and Emma how to can, how to store food for months. The pantry filled with jars of vegetables, bright and colorful, proof that they could feed themselves. James started hunting again, brought home deer which they butchered together, packaged, and froze. Then rabbits. Then he taught David to shoot, and David brought home his first turkey with a whoop of victory that echoed across the fields. And slowly, quietly, neighbors started showing up. First was Mary Patterson, who lived 5 miles east and raised sheep. She'd heard about the garden, about the chickens, about Margaret's campaign. She showed up with wool and a proposal. I need vegetables. You need warm clothes for winter. We trade? Clara looked at the wool, thought about Sarah's threadbare jacket. Deal. Mary smiled. Margaret's held this county hostage for too long. About time someone stood up to her. Then came Robert Torres, who had dairy cows and was tired of Margaret's pricing games. He'd trade milk and cheese for eggs and preserved vegetables. Then Anna Kowalski, who made soap and candles. Then the Johnsons, who had pigs. Within a month, a network had formed. People who were tired of being controlled, tired of having no options, tired of Margaret Fletcher deciding who prospered and who failed. They started meeting at the ranch, trading goods, sharing resources, creating an economy that existed entirely outside Margaret's influence. Margaret noticed. She came to the ranch on a Tuesday, unannounced, fury barely contained beneath her polite veneer. James, we need to talk. I'm busy. I'm sure you are. Building your little rebellion. Very impressive. She gestured at the garden, the chicken coop, the neighbors' trucks parked in the yard. But you're forgetting something important. Which is? I still hold your note, the debt from Katie's medical bills, the loans you took when the cattle prices dropped. You're 3 months behind on payments. James went pale. Clara had known the debt existed, but not the specifics. 3 months behind meant, I could call it in tomorrow. Foreclose. Take this land and everything on it. Margaret's voice was soft, dangerous. Is that what you want? To lose everything because you're too proud to accept help? Your help comes with strings. All help comes with strings, James. That's how the world works. I'm simply honest about it. She turned to Clara. Your background check came back clean, I hear. Congratulations. But that doesn't change the fundamental problem. You're still here, still causing disruption, still turning my own community against me. Your community? Clara stepped forward. These people don't belong to you. Don't they? I've supported them through droughts and recessions. I've extended credit when banks wouldn't. I've kept this town alive when it wanted to die. Margaret's mask slipped, showing something uglier underneath. And I will not let some nobody from nowhere tear down what I've built. You've built a cage. I've built stability, order, a functioning community where people know their place and everything works. She looked at the garden again, disgust clear on her face. This little experiment of yours? It's chaos, and chaos doesn't last. She left, and the threat hung in the air like smoke. Can she really take the ranch? Clara asked. James nodded, defeated again. The debt's real. I've been barely making minimum payments. If she calls it in, he stopped. We'd have 30 days, maybe less. Then we find a way to pay her. With what? Tomatoes and good intentions? Clara didn't have an answer, not yet. But that night, lying in bed, she thought about Margaret's words, about chaos and order, about control and freedom, about what happens when you refuse to play by someone else's rules. The network kept growing. Word spread about the trading, about the way people were finding independence from Margaret's store. More families joined. The weekly gatherings at the ranch became something bigger, part market, part community meeting, part quiet rebellion. Margaret retaliated by raising prices again, by calling in debts from people she knew were participating in the trading network, by making it clear that defiance had consequences. Some people backed away, scared, but others doubled down, got angry, started organizing. And Clara realized something. Margaret's power came from isolation, from keeping people separate and dependent. The trading network did the opposite. It connected people, made them realize they were stronger together than apart. We need to make this official, Clara said at one of the gatherings. 20 families crowded into the barn, trading goods, sharing news. A real cooperative. Pool resources, negotiate together, Create real alternatives. Margaret will destroy us, someone muttered. She's already trying to destroy us individually. At least together we can fight back. Mary Patterson stood up. I'm in. Tired of being afraid. Robert Torres nodded. Me too. One by one, hands went up. Not everyone. Fear was powerful, and Margaret's reach was long. But enough. Enough to matter. They formed the cooperative that night, drew up rules, elected representatives, started planning bigger. A bulk purchase of winter supplies ordered from suppliers 3 counties away. A community barn raising for a family whose roof had collapsed. A fund to help people who'd been cut off from credit. It was small, it was fragile, but it was real. And Margaret couldn't control it. The background check cleared on a Wednesday. Linda Chen called personally to tell Clara she was free to resume normal duties, that the case was closed, that the children were clearly thriving. For what it's worth, Linda said, I've seen a lot of false reports. People using the system to hurt each other. This was one of the more obvious ones. Those kids love you. Thank you. But watch yourself. Whoever filed that complaint, they're not done. People like that don't stop. Clara knew. She'd known from the beginning. This wasn't over. That night, they celebrated. Clara made a real dinner, roast chicken from their own coop, vegetables from their own garden, bread made from scratch. The kids were loud, laughing, fighting over seconds. James actually smiled, genuine and unguarded. Sarah stood to clear plates and Clara stopped her. Sit. I've got this. You sure? Positive? You've done enough. Sarah sat back down, and for the first time since Clara had met her, the girl looked her age. Just 14. Still a child, despite everything that had tried to make her grow up too fast. Later, after the kids were in bed, James and Clara sat on the porch. The cooperative had brought in enough through trading fees to make 1 month's payment on the debt. It wasn't much, but it was something. I never thought this would work, James said. People coming together like this? Thought everyone was too scared of Margaret. They were. Some still are. But fear gets exhausting when you carry it long enough. She's going to escalate, you know that. Clara nodded. Probably, but we're ready. Are we? He looked at her. I'm not sure I ever asked. Why are you doing this? You could have left a dozen times. Could have found an easier situation, a family with less baggage. Why stay and fight someone else's battle? Clara thought about the answer. About the real truth beneath all the practical reasons. Because I'm tired of running, tired of being the person who leaves when things get hard. And maybe I needed to prove to myself that I could be the one who stays. She looked at the house, at the light in the windows, at the life they were building against all odds. These kids needed someone. Turns out I needed them too. James was quiet for a long time. Then, thank you. For staying, for fighting, for giving them something to believe in again. They're giving me the same thing. Inside, Thomas cried out from a nightmare. Clara started to rise, but James stopped her. I've got him. She watched him go inside, heard his voice soothing Thomas back to sleep, and felt something shift. This family was healing, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but healing. The blow came 2 weeks later. Clara was at the market in town. Not Margaret's store, but a farmer's market that had started up as a direct result of the cooperative. Margaret couldn't stop people from selling their own goods, but she could watch and glare and make her disapproval known. Clara was examining apples when she felt it, that prickling awareness of being watched. She turned. Margaret stood 10 feet away, holding a newspaper. Her expression was triumphant. Seen the paper today? No. You should. Front page, very interesting reading. She handed it over, and Clara's stomach dropped. The headline read, Child Services Investigate Local Ranch. Below it, a detailed article about the allegations of neglect, about Clara's unclear background, about concerns for the welfare of 7 vulnerable children. The article was factual, technically accurate, and completely devastating. It mentioned the background check, cleared, but the implication was there. Where there's smoke, there's fire. It quoted anonymous sources expressing concern. It made Clara sound suspicious. The situation dangerous. The children at risk. You did this. I simply spoke to a reporter who was interested in community welfare. What he chose to print is his business. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. But I imagine people will have questions. The cooperative members, for instance. Do they really want to be associated with someone who's been investigated by child services? Even if you were cleared, the appearance of impropriety is so damaging. And Clara's hands shook. You can't. Can't what? Tell the truth? It's all accurate. You were investigated. There were allegations. These are facts. She leaned closer. But I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to let this blow over. All you have to do is leave, quietly, today. And I'll make sure the next article focuses on how the misunderstanding was resolved, how the children are fine, how there was never any real danger. No. Think about those children, Clara. Think about what this publicity does to them. Kids at school reading about how their home was investigated. Neighbors wondering. The stain never fully washes out, you know. Her voice turned almost kind. Leave, and I protect them from that. Stay, and it gets worse. She walked away, leaving Clara standing in the market, holding the newspaper that had just weaponized the truth against her. By evening, everyone had seen it. The phone at the ranch rang constantly. Cooperative members wanting to know if the children were really okay, if Clara was trustworthy, if they should distance themselves from the situation. Some offered support. Others made excuses and stopped coming to the gatherings. At dinner, the kids were quiet. They'd heard about the article from classmates, from teachers, from people who thought they were being helpful by asking if everything was all right at home. They're talking about us again, Emma said quietly, like we're broken. You're not broken. Then why does everyone keep trying to fix us? Clara didn't have a good answer. Just reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. Sarah pushed her plate away. I'm not hungry. Sarah. I said I'm not hungry. She stood, chair scraping. I'm sick of this. Sick of people talking about us, writing about us, acting like we're some charity case they need to save. We were doing fine. We were actually doing fine. And then you... She stopped, tears streaming. I don't know who I'm even mad at anymore. She ran upstairs. A door slammed. The other kids scattered. Thomas stayed, looking up at Clara with those serious eyes. You're not going to leave because of the newspaper, right? No, buddy, I'm not leaving. Promise? Promise. He nodded and went to find his siblings. Clara and James sat in the kitchen, the newspaper between them like evidence at a crime scene. She's destroying us, James said, methodically, precisely, and we can't stop her. Yes, we can. How? She owns the narrative now, owns public opinion. Even if we fight back, who's going to believe us over her? Clara stared at the article, at the careful way it told the truth while lying, at the way Margaret had taken their survival and made it sound like scandal. And she realized they'd been playing defense this whole time, reacting to Margaret's moves, trying to survive her attacks. But survival wasn't enough. It was time to go on offense. We tell our own story, yeah, Clara said. Louder, better. We show people what this really is. A woman trying to destroy a family because they won't submit to her control. How? The cooperative. We've got 20 families now, families who've seen what Margaret does, who've felt her control. We make this bigger than us. Make it about everyone she's hurt, everyone she's manipulated, everyone who's tired of being under her thumb. That's not a fight we can win. Maybe not, but it's better than lying down and dying. James looked at her for a long moment, then stood, walked to the stairs, called up. Family meeting! Everyone down here, now! They came slowly, reluctantly. Sarah last, eyes red, arms crossed. James waited until they were all seated. Then he said, Clara and I have a choice to make. We can let Margaret Fletcher win, let her scare us into submission, into giving up everything we've built. Or we can fight back. But if we fight, things will get worse before they get better. There will be more articles, more investigations, more pressure. It will be hard. Harder than anything we've faced so far. He looked at each child. So I'm asking you, what do you want us to do? Silence. Then Thomas spoke up, voice small but clear. I want Clara to stay. Me too, Emma said. David nodded. We can't let her win. The twins, for once in agreement, fight. Everyone looked at Sarah. She stared at the table, jaw working. "Sarah?" James prompted gently. She looked up, and her eyes were hard, determined. "I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of people like Mrs. Fletcher making us feel small. Mom wouldn't have run. Mom would have fought." She looked at Clara. "So we fight." Clara felt something break open in her chest. These children, who had every reason to choose safety over risk, choosing courage instead. "Okay then," James said. "We fight." And in that moment, sitting around a kitchen table in a ranch that was barely holding together, they became something more than a broken family trying to survive. They became an army. The town council meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of every month, held in the community center that doubled as a voting hall and occasionally hosted wedding receptions. Clara had never paid attention to local politics before, had never imagined she'd need to. But standing outside the building with James and half the cooperative membership, she understood that politics was just another word for power. And power was what this fight was really about. "You sure about this?" James asked for the third time. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The plan was simple, maybe too simple. They'd requested time on the agenda to present the cooperative as an official community organization, to make their case for why local farmers and families should have alternatives to Margaret's monopoly. Make it public. Make it legitimate. Force the council to acknowledge what they were building. Margaret would be there, of course. She sat on the council, had for 15 years. They filed in with everyone else. Ranchers in work clothes, business owners in suits that had seen better days, retirees with nothing better to do on a Thursday night. The council sat at a long table at the front. 5 members, including Margaret, who watched the cooperative group enter with an expression that gave nothing away. The meeting started with procedural business. Budget approvals, zoning discussions, a debate about whether to repair the stop sign on County Road 14 or replace it entirely. Clara only half listened, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, the council president, a thin man named Howard who owned the hardware store, looked at his notes. "We have a request from James Whitlock to address the council regarding a new community organization. Mr. Whitlock, you have 5 minutes." James stood, papers shaking slightly in his hands. He'd never been comfortable with public speaking, had told Clara as much during their practice sessions. But he walked to the front and faced the room. "Thank you. I'm here to talk about the Valley Farmers Cooperative, which we established 2 months ago to help local families pool resources and reduce costs. We currently have 23 member families who trade goods and services, purchase supplies in bulk, and support each other during difficult times." He outlined the basics, the trading network, the community barn raising, the way they'd help 3 families avoid foreclosure by collective bargaining with creditors. His voice grew steadier as he spoke, finding conviction in the facts. This isn't about profit. It's about survival, about giving people options when they've only had one choice for too long. "We're asking the council to recognize us as an official organization which would allow us to negotiate better rates with suppliers and potentially secure grants for agricultural development." He sat down. The room was quiet. Howard looked at the other council members. "Questions?" Margaret leaned forward, her voice carrying that same false kindness Clara had learned to hate. "James, I appreciate what you're trying to do, truly. But I have some concerns." She pulled out papers of her own. "I've done some research into these cooperative organizations. They sound wonderful in theory, but the failure rate is quite high. 70% collapse within the first year. The financial risk to members can be substantial. We're not asking for financial backing, but you are asking for official recognition, which implies council endorsement, which means when your cooperative fails, and statistics suggest it will, the council will be associated with that failure." She smiled at the room. "I'd hate to see good families lose what little they have because of a well-intentioned but ultimately unsustainable venture." Mary Patterson stood up from the audience. "I'm one of those families, and I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining options." "Of course you feel that way now, Mary, but 6 months from now, when the cooperative can't deliver on its promises, when the bulk orders don't arrive or the quality isn't what you expected, you'll be right back where you started, except you'll have wasted time and resources on a failed experiment." "Better than being held hostage by your prices," someone called out. The room stirred. Howard banged his gavel. "Order, please." Margaret's expression hardened for just a second before smoothing back to concern. "I understand there's frustration about the economic situation. These are difficult times for everyone. But the solution isn't to abandon proven systems for untested alternatives. My store has served this community for 30 years, through recessions, droughts, every hardship imaginable. I've extended credit when no one else would, kept families afloat when they had nothing, and made sure they stayed in debt to you forever," Clara said, standing before she could think better of it. All eyes turned to her. Margaret's gaze could have cut glass. "Miss Whitlock, how nice of you to join the discussion." The way she said "miss" made it sound like an insult. "Though I'm not sure you have standing here, given that you're not actually a member of this community. You've been here, what, 3 months? 4. 4 months. Barely enough time to understand how things work here, the relationships that have been built over decades. Yet here you are, encouraging people to dismantle systems they don't understand." Clara felt her face flush but held her ground. "I understand that people deserve choices, that one person shouldn't control an entire town's economy. I don't control anything. I provide a service. If people choose to shop elsewhere, they're free to do so. The nearest alternative is 60 miles away. That's geography, not manipulation. I can't help where this town is located." Margaret stood, addressed the council directly. "This cooperative is being presented as a community benefit, but let's be honest about what it really is. It's a handful of people, led by someone with a grudge, trying to undermine a legitimate business because they don't want to pay fair market prices." "Fair market?" Robert Torres was on his feet now. "You charged me $18 for a bag of feed that costs $12 everywhere else. Shipping costs, overhead, the realities of running a business in a remote location. Funny how those realities only apply when it's convenient for you." The meeting dissolved into chaos, people shouting over each other, the gavel banging uselessly, accusations flying. Clara stood frozen, watching her careful plan fall apart. They'd wanted to present a united front, a professional case. Instead, they looked exactly like what Margaret had accused them of being, angry malcontents with no real solution. Howard finally restored order by threatening to clear the room. When silence fell, he looked exhausted. "I think we've heard enough for tonight. Council will take the cooperative recognition request under advisement. We'll vote at next month's meeting." "That's a month away," James protested. "That's the process. Meeting adjourned." Outside, the cooperative members clustered in the parking lot, angry and disappointed. "That was a disaster," someone muttered. "We looked like fools." Maybe Margaret's right. Maybe this is a waste of time. Clara felt the momentum draining away, felt the fear creeping back in. One bad meeting and people were ready to quit. Margaret knew it too. Clara could see her in the doorway, watching with satisfaction as the group fractured. "Listen," Clara said, loud enough to cut through the murmuring. "That didn't go how we wanted. Margaret outmaneuvered us. But that doesn't mean we're wrong. It means we need to be smarter." "How?" Mary asked. "She's on the council. She controls the narrative. What chance do we have?" "We have the truth. We have numbers. We have proof that this works." Clara gestured at the group. 23 families are surviving better than they were 4 months ago. That's not nothing. We just need to make sure everyone else knows it. Robert nodded slowly. "She's right. We've been reactive this whole time. We need to get ahead of the story." They talked for another hour, standing in the cold parking lot, rebuilding what had almost collapsed. By the time people started driving home, they had a plan. Not perfect, but something. Document everything. Savings, success stories, the concrete ways the cooperative was helping. Invite people to see it for themselves. Make it impossible to deny the results. The drive home was quiet. The kids had stayed with Anna Kowalski, who'd volunteered to babysit despite not being part of the cooperative. "Those children have been through enough," she'd said simply. "They don't need to see adults fighting." When Clara and James picked them up, Sarah took one look at their faces and knew. It went bad. "Could have gone better," James admitted. Back at the ranch, after the kids were in bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. She'd been so sure that presenting their case publicly would help, that sunshine would disinfect what Margaret had been doing in the shadows. Instead, she'd just given Margaret another platform to control. Stop, James said. Stop what? Beating yourself up. I can see you doing it. We walked right into her trap. Maybe. Or maybe we just had our first real confrontation and it didn't go perfectly. Doesn't mean it's over. He poured coffee, set a cup in front of her. You know what Katie used to say? Progress isn't a straight line. Sometimes you have to fall backward to figure out which way is forward. Smart woman. The smartest. She would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated someone willing to fight for her kids. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I'm not fighting for them. I'm fighting with them. There's a difference. I know. That's why it matters. The next morning brought another crisis. Clara was making breakfast when she heard the truck. Not James's, something heavier. She looked out the window and saw a county vehicle pulling into the yard. The man who emerged wore a county inspector's badge and carried a clipboard. Clara's stomach sank. Morning, ma'am. I'm here to conduct a health and safety inspection of the premises. On whose authority? Anonymous complaint, allegations of unsafe living conditions. He consulted his clipboard. Electrical hazards, structural deficiencies, potential fire code violations. Clara almost laughed. Of course. Can't beat them at the council meeting. Send inspectors to find violations. The inspection took 3 hours. The man went through everything, electrical outlets, support beams, the chicken coop, the garden, even the children's bedrooms. He measured, photographed, made notes in cramped handwriting that Clara couldn't read. The kids watched from the porch, scared again. Thomas held Clara's hand so tight it hurt. Finally, the inspector returned to his truck. You'll receive a formal report within 10 business days. Any violations will need to be corrected within 30 days, or you'll face fines and potential legal action. And if we can't afford the corrections? That's not my department, ma'am. I just identify the problems. He drove away, leaving Clara furious and helpless in equal measure. James came in from the fields, saw her expression, and didn't need to ask. What did he find? I don't know yet, but I'm sure Margaret made sure he'd find something. The report arrived 8 days later. 7 pages of violations, ranging from minor to significant. The electrical panel was outdated. 2 support beams in the barn showed rot. The chicken coop needed reinforcing. Fire extinguishers were required in multiple locations. The list went on. Estimated cost to fix everything, $8,000. James read through it twice, then set it down like it was contaminated. I don't have $8,000. Even with the cooperative, I'm barely keeping current on the mortgage. There has to be a way to contest this. Some of these violations are ridiculous. Doesn't matter if they're ridiculous. They're code. And if we don't fix them, they can condemn the property. Take the kids. His voice went hollow. She's not trying to win anymore. She's trying to destroy us completely. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. This wasn't about control or money or even pride anymore. This was about annihilation. Margaret had decided that anything less than total victory was unacceptable. That night, Clara called an emergency cooperative meeting. 30 people showed up at the ranch, more than had joined officially, word spreading about the inspection, about Margaret's latest attack. She's not just coming after us anymore, Clara told them. She's making an example, showing everyone what happens when you don't fall in line. If we don't push back now, we're all finished. What can we do? Someone asked. We don't have $8,000 between all of us. We have something better. We have skills. Clara looked around the room. Robert, you're an electrician, right? Was before I went full-time farming. Can you fix an electrical panel? Sure, if I had the parts. And Tom, you did construction before your injury. Think you could shore up some support beams? Tom nodded slowly. If I had help in materials, yeah. The plan came together piece by piece. People offering skills, time, labor. Someone knew a supplier 2 counties over who sold building materials at cost. Someone else's brother worked for the fire safety company and could get extinguishers wholesale. What they couldn't afford to pay for, they'd do themselves. This is exactly what Margaret's afraid of, Mary said. People realizing they don't need her, that they can take care of each other. They scheduled a work weekend, 2 days to tackle as many violations as possible, turn the inspection report from a death sentence into a manageable problem. But first, Clara had something else to do. She drove to the newspaper office in the county seat, a 40-minute drive that gave her too much time to second-guess herself. The building was small, unimpressive, just a storefront with County Chronicle painted on the window. The editor was a woman in her 50s named Patricia, who looked up from a desk covered in papers and coffee cups. "Help you?" "I want to tell you a story about a woman who's been using her economic power to control an entire community and what happened when people tried to fight back." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "That's quite an opening. You got proof?" Clara opened her bag and pulled out everything she'd brought. Copies of inflated receipts from Margaret's store, testimony from cooperative members about threats and manipulation, the inspection report that was clearly retaliatory, the timeline of Margaret's escalation. Patricia went through it all, asking questions, taking notes. Finally, she looked up. "You know, if I print this, Margaret Fletcher will come after me too." "I know. And you're asking me to do it anyway." "I'm asking you to do your job, to tell people the truth about what's happening in their own county." Patricia smiled, sharp and interested. "You got a name for this cooperative of yours?" "Valley Farmers Cooperative." "Catchy. Okay, miss. Whitlock. Clara Whitlock." "Okay, Clara, I'll do some digging, verify what you've given me, talk to some people. If it checks out, I'll run something. Can't promise when or how big, but I'll run something." It was more than Clara had expected. She drove home feeling like maybe, possibly, they had a chance. The work weekend exceeded every expectation. Nearly 50 people showed up. Not just cooperative members, but neighbors who'd heard what was happening, people who were tired of being afraid, families who wanted to be part of something that pushed back. They swarmed the ranch like an army. Robert and 2 other electricians tackled the panel. Tom and a crew shored up the barn. Someone's teenage son, who wanted to be a contractor someday, learned how to reinforce the chicken coop, while Marcus and Matthew supervised with an authority that would have been funny if it wasn't so earnest. Sarah organized the food. Cooperative members had brought enough to feed everyone, and she turned the chaos into a system, making sure workers were fed and hydrated. Emma and some other kids ran supplies where they were needed, important and useful and glowing with purpose. Clara worked alongside everyone else, sawing, hammering, painting. Her hands blistered and her back screamed, but she kept going. Because this was more than fixing code violations. This was community in action, people choosing each other over fear. By Sunday evening, they'd completed 70% of the work. The electrical panel was upgraded. The barn was reinforced. Fire extinguishers hung in their proper locations. What remained was minor enough that James could finish it himself over the next week. As people packed up to leave, Tom approached Clara, his expression serious. "My wife and I talked. We want to join the cooperative officially. We've been scared of Margaret for too long. This," he gestured at the ranch, at what they'd built together, "this is worth fighting for." 5 other families said the same thing before the night ended. The cooperative grew to 28 members in a single weekend. Margaret found out, of course. She always found out. Clara was in town the following Tuesday, picking up a specialty part for the truck, when she saw Margaret's car pull up. The woman emerged like she was going to war, her face rigid with fury barely contained. "You're making this so much worse than it needs to be." "I'm just living my life. You're building an insurgency, turning my own community against me. Do you understand what you've done?" "I've helped people realize they have options." "You've helped them make a terrible mistake." Margaret's voice rose, control slipping. "Everything I've done has been for this town. Every hard decision, every tough choice. I kept this place alive when it wanted to die. I held families together when they would have fallen apart. And you," she pointed a shaking finger, "you come in with your naive idealism and your self-righteousness and destroy in months what took me years to build." "You built a cage. I'm just showing people the door." Margaret's laugh was ugly. "You think this is over? You think a few weekends of manual labor and some feel-good community nonsense changes anything? I own this town. I own the debt, the credit, the leverage. You can't win. Watch me." Clara walked away before Margaret could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd just declared open war. No more pretending this was about economics or business disputes. This was personal now. The article ran the following week. Patricia hadn't just written a story, she'd written an exposé. 3 full pages detailing Margaret's business practices, the inflated prices, the retaliatory tactics against the cooperative. She'd interviewed a dozen sources, documented years of manipulation and control. The headline read, "One Woman's Kingdom: How Margaret Fletcher Built an Empire on a County's Dependence." It was everything Clara had hoped for and more. The response was immediate. People who'd been on the fence about the cooperative called to join. Local radio picked up the story. Someone started a petition calling for Margaret to step down from the town council. And Margaret, for the first time, went silent. For 3 days, nothing. No retaliation, no response, no threats. Just silence. It made Clara more nervous than anything that had come before. "She's planning something," James said. They were in the barn checking on the repairs, but really just giving themselves somewhere to talk privately. "Something big. I know. Are we ready for it?" "I don't know that either." The blow came on a Friday night. Clara was reading Thomas a bedtime story when she smelled it. Smoke. She ran to the window. The barn they'd just repaired, just reinforced, was on fire. Flames licking up the walls, smoke billowing into the night sky. "James!" She screamed his name while grabbing Thomas, running to get the other kids. "Fire! Everyone out!" The house emptied in seconds. All 7 children in the yard, crying, terrified, as James ran toward the barn with a fire extinguisher that was laughably inadequate against the inferno. Clara called 911 while trying to keep the kids back, keep them safe. The fire department was 20 minutes away. The barn would be ash by then. James came back, face black with smoke, empty extinguisher in his hand. "The cattle. They're panicking. You can't go back in there. I have to." He ran before she could stop him, disappeared into the smoke. Clara's world narrowed to terror, the children screaming, the barn collapsing. James somewhere inside with animals that could trample him, smoke that could choke him, flames that could... He emerged with 2 cows, then went back. Came out with 3 more. Back again. The fire department arrived as the roof collapsed. They contained the blaze, kept it from spreading to the house, but the barn was gone, destroyed completely. The fire marshal did his investigation while the family sat in the yard, wrapped in blankets, watching smoke rise from what used to be their livelihood. "'Cause appears to be arson," the marshal said. "Accelerant used. Someone set this deliberately." "Who would..." James started, but everyone knew. Everyone had always known. The marshal looked uncomfortable. "Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt you?" Clara almost laughed. Enemies. Like this was some kind of mystery. Margaret Fletcher. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am. Do you have proof?" "Just months of escalating harassment, threats, and retaliation. Take your pick." "I'll need to investigate, talk to people, but without physical evidence linking her to the fire, she's got an alibi already prepared. I'd bet money on it." The marshal left. The fire trucks left. Eventually, the neighbors who'd gathered to help left too. The family sat in the ruins, ash falling like snow. Everything they'd fought to save reduced to charred wood and smoke. Thomas crawled into Clara's lap. "Is this because of you?" The question hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Marcus said Mrs. Fletcher hates you. Said if you weren't here, none of this would happen." Clara looked at James, at Sarah, at all of them. Saw the question reflected in their eyes. Was this her fault? Had her presence brought this destruction? "Thomas," James said carefully, "this isn't about Clara. This is about someone who can't stand losing control. It would have happened eventually, no matter what." But Clara wasn't sure that was true. If she'd left when Margaret first demanded it, would the barn still be standing? Would these children still have a place for their cattle, their livelihood, their future? She carried Thomas inside, got all the kids into bed, though none of them would sleep. Then she went to her room, closed the door, and let herself fall apart. The knock came after midnight. Sarah standing in the doorway. "You can't leave." "I'm not..." "Yes, you are. I can see you thinking about it. Thinking that if you go, she'll stop." Sarah sat on the bed, looking older than 14 had any right to look. "But she won't. This isn't about you, it's about power. And if you leave now, if you let her win like this, then she'll know that fire works, that destruction works, that if she hurts us enough, people will do what she wants. Your barn is gone. Your cattle could have died. Your father could have... but didn't. We're alive. We're together. And yeah, it's bad, but it's not over. Sarah grabbed Clara's hand. You taught us to fight. You can't stop now just because the fighting got hard. Clara pulled her into a hug. This girl who'd grown from a brittle, overburdened teenager into someone strong enough to hold others up. Okay, I stay. Promise? Promise. The morning revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was a total loss. 3 cows had died in the fire. The equipment stored inside destroyed. Insurance would cover some of it, but not enough, never enough. The cooperative rallied again. Materials donated, labor volunteered, plans drawn up for rebuilding. But it would take time they didn't have, money they didn't possess. And underneath it all, the knowledge that Margaret had done this, had burned them out and would face no consequences because proof was impossible and her power remained intact. Clara sat in the wreckage that afternoon, trying to figure out what came next, when a car pulled up. Not Margaret's, Patricia's. The reporter got out, looked at the destruction, and her expression went hard. She really did it. Can't prove it. No, but I can write about it, can connect the dots and let people draw their own conclusions. Patricia pulled out her phone, started taking pictures. There's going to be pushback. She'll threaten to sue, claim defamation. My editor might kill the story. But I'm tired of people like Margaret Fletcher getting away with this, using fear and money to control everyone around them. Someone needs to push back. She looked at Clara. You've given this county something it hasn't had in years. Hope that things can be different. I'm not letting that die without a fight. The second article ran 3 days later. Smaller than the first, but more direct. Suspicious fire destroys barn days after expose on local businesswoman. Patricia didn't accuse Margaret directly, couldn't, legally, but the implication was clear. The response was bigger than anything before. People were angry, not just cooperative members, but the broader community. Someone organized a fundraiser for the barn rebuilding. The local diner put out a donation jar. Anonymous gifts started arriving: lumber, tools, cash in unmarked envelopes. A county commissioner called for an investigation into Margaret's business practices. The state attorney general's office sent someone to look into potential antitrust violations. For the first time, Margaret was on the defensive, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. Clara was driving back from the hardware store when she saw the police lights. Her first thought was another inspection, another harassment tactic. Then she saw it was heading toward the ranch, and her blood went cold. She drove faster than she should have, heart in her throat, arriving to find 2 police cars and Linda Chen from Child Services. The kids were on the porch again, terrified again. James stood between them and the officials, looking like he might physically fight anyone who tried to take them. What's happening? Linda looked genuinely distressed. There's been another complaint. Allegations that the children are being kept in dangerous conditions after the fire, that the home is unstable, that they're being exposed to threats and violence. That's insane. I know, I can see what you've been doing, but I have to follow protocol. I have to inspect again, interview the children again. I'm sorry. This time was worse than the first. The police presence made it feel criminal. The questions were harder, more pointed. Were they afraid? Did they feel safe? Had anyone threatened them? Thomas broke down crying during his interview. Emma stopped talking entirely. The twins got belligerent, which didn't help anything. When it was over, Linda pulled Clara and James aside. I'm going to be honest with you. Someone is building a case. These complaints are strategic, designed to create a pattern of instability. Individually, none of them would justify removal. But together, she stopped. You need a lawyer, a good one. Because if this keeps escalating, the next step is emergency custody. They want to take the kids, James said flatly after Linda left. Margaret wants to take the kids. Wants to use the system to rip this family apart because she can't control you any other way. Clara felt rage burning through her, hot and clarifying. We're not letting that happen. How do we stop it? Clara thought about everything they'd done, every way they'd tried to fight back that had ended in escalation. Margaret was too entrenched, too powerful, too willing to destroy anything in her path. There was only one way to end this. They had to break her completely. The town council meeting was in 2 days. The vote on cooperative recognition that had been postponed, delayed, pushed back. But it was finally happening. Clara spent those 2 days making calls, having conversations, building something she should have built from the beginning. Not just resistance, revolution. When they walked into that community center, they brought everyone. All 42 cooperative families. It had grown that much. Neighbors who'd been helped by the network. People who'd donated to the barn fund. The reporter. A lawyer who'd offered to represent them pro bono. Even Anna Kowalski, who'd told Clara privately that she'd been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to Margaret. The room was packed, standing room only. Margaret sat at the council table, her face a mask of calm. But Clara could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table. Howard called the meeting to order, clearly unprepared for the crowd. We're here to vote on recognition of the Valley Farmers Cooperative. Before we do, both sides will have an opportunity to speak. Margaret went first. She was polished, professional, reasonable. Talked about fiscal responsibility, about protecting the community from unproven ventures, about maintaining stability during uncertain times. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood at the front of that room, looked at the faces watching her, some supportive, some skeptical, all of them tired of being afraid, and told them the truth. Not about Margaret specifically, about what happened when one person held all the power, when there were no alternatives, when fear became the governing principle of people's lives, about what happened when you let that fear win. 3 months ago, I came to this county with nothing, 2 suitcases and nowhere else to go. I took a job no one else wanted because I had no other options. And I watched a family that had been destroyed by grief slowly start to heal. Not because of me, because they decided to try, to hope, to believe things could be different. She told them about the cooperative, about the concrete ways it had helped people, about the barn that had burned and the community that had rebuilt it, about the inspections and the complaints and the systematic harassment designed to make them quit. Someone in this room wants us to fail, wants to prove that standing up for yourself leads to destruction, that it's safer to stay quiet, stay dependent, stay controlled. Clara looked directly at Margaret. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. We are stronger together than she is alone. And if we vote for this cooperative, we're voting for a future where people have choices, where one person's power doesn't determine everyone else's survival. She sat down. The room was silent. Howard cleared his throat. Council will now vote. All in favor of recognizing the Valley Farmers Cooperative as an official community organization? 3 hands went up immediately. 3 council members who'd apparently been waiting for permission to defy Margaret. Howard's hand went up slowly, making it 4. Everyone looked at Margaret. Her vote didn't matter mathematically. They had the majority. But symbolically, it was everything. She stared at Clara with something close to hatred. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. Unanimous approval, Howard said, sounding shocked. The cooperative is officially recognized. The room erupted, people cheering, hugging, crying with relief. Clara stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. Margaret pushed back from the table and walked out without a word. Clara followed. Outside, Margaret stood by her car, shaking with rage or something else Clara couldn't quite name. Why did you vote yes? Margaret laughed, bitter and broken. Because you've already won. Don't you see that? The cooperative, the articles, the investigation. I've lost control. My own council just voted against me while I sat there helpless. So yes, I voted for your cooperative because fighting it anymore just makes me look worse. So this is over? Don't be naive. This is never over. People like you and people like me, we're fundamentally opposed. You think community should be about mutual support and cooperation. I know it should be about order and stability, even if that requires control. She got in her car. You haven't broken me, Clara. You've just changed the battlefield. She drove away, and Clara stood in the parking lot, victory tasting like ash in her mouth. Because Margaret was right. Nothing was over. If anything, it had just begun. The victory celebration at the ranch lasted until past midnight, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just won a battle in a war that was far from over. She watched the cooperative members laugh and drink coffee in her kitchen, Watched James actually smile for the first time in what felt like forever. Watched the children show off the new barn plans to anyone who'd listen. But Margaret's last words kept echoing in her head. "You've just changed the battlefield." 2 days later, Clara found out what that meant. She was in town picking up wire for the new chicken coop expansion when she saw the crowd gathered outside Margaret's store. Not angry, not protesting, just standing there, reading something posted in the window. Clara pushed through, her stomach already sinking. The sign was professional, typed on expensive paper, impossible to miss. After 30 years of service to this community, Fletcher's General Store will be closing permanently. Thank you for your patronage. "She's shutting down," someone whispered. Just like that. Clara stared at the sign, trying to understand. Margaret's store was her power base, her source of control. Closing it made no sense unless she had something worse planned. Mary Patterson appeared at Clara's elbow, her face pale. "This is bad." "How is this bad?" "She's giving up." "No, she's cutting loose ends. Think about it. The store is probably hemorrhaging money now that people are using the cooperative. She's underwater on it. So she closes, writes off the loss, and suddenly she's not the villain anymore. She's the victim. The businesswoman forced out by unfair competition. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. And everyone who still owed her money, she can call in those debts all at once. Without the store, she doesn't need to maintain relationships. She can just collect. They stood there in the cold morning, watching people read the sign and slowly understand what it meant for them. Margaret wasn't surrendering. She was scorching the earth. By noon, the first notices went out. Clara heard about it from Robert, who showed up at the ranch with a letter that shook in his hands. "She's calling in everything. The full amount due in 30 days, $23,000. His voice cracked. "I don't have $23,000. I don't have a quarter of that." "How many others got letters?" "Everyone. Everyone who ever took credit from her store. She's collecting from the whole county at once." James came in from the field, took one look at Robert's face, and knew. "We got one too?" "Not yet, but we will." The letter arrived the next morning, hand-delivered by a process server, official and legal and devastating. Margaret was calling in the debt from Katie's medical bills, from the years of keeping the ranch barely afloat. $41,000, due in 30 days, or she'd foreclose. James read it 3 times, then set it on the table like it might explode. "I can't pay this. Not in 30 days. Not in 30 years. Then we fight it. Get the lawyer. The debt's legitimate, Clara. I signed the papers. Agreed to the terms. She has every legal right to collect." He laughed, hollow and broken. "She waited until we thought we'd won. Let us celebrate. Let us feel safe. Then she pulled the trigger on all of us at once." Sarah was listening from the doorway. She'd been doing that more lately, listening to adult conversations she shouldn't have to hear, learning that victory was temporary and safety was an illusion. "So what do we do?" James looked at his daughter, and Clara saw him trying to find an answer that didn't end in losing everything. He couldn't. "I don't know, baby. I really don't know." The emergency cooperative meeting that night was the biggest yet. 60 people crammed into the ranch house and spilling out onto the porch, every single one of them holding a letter, a notice, a demand for payment they couldn't possibly meet. The mood was beyond angry. It was desperate. "She's destroying everyone," Tom said, his voice shaking. "Not just hurting us, destroying us. Taking our land, our homes, everything." "Can she do this legally?" someone asked. The pro bono lawyer, Mitchell Hayes, who'd driven 3 hours to be there, nodded grimly. "If the debts are legitimate and the terms allow for acceleration, then yes, she can demand full payment. You'd have to prove the original loans were predatory or that she's acting in bad faith, and that's impossible," Clara finished, because she documented everything perfectly, made sure every loan was technically legal. Exactly. She's been planning this, probably for months, maybe since the cooperative first formed. Mitchell looked around the room. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear, but unless we can find some angle I'm not seeing, she's within her rights." The room fell silent. 60 families facing ruin with no legal recourse. Mary spoke up, her voice small. "So we just lose? After everything we built, everything we fought for, We just hand over our land and walk away? There might be another option, Mitchell said slowly. It's risky. Might make things worse. But it's something. We're listening. Bankruptcy. If enough of you file at once, it triggers an automatic stay on collections. Freezes everything while the court sorts it out. Buys you time, at least. Maybe enough time to negotiate settlements, work out payment plans. Bankruptcy ruins your credit, someone protested. Makes it impossible to get loans, to rebuild. You're going to lose everything anyway. This way, you might keep some of it, and you'd all be doing it together, which sends a message. Shows that Margaret drove an entire community to financial collapse out of spite. Clara watched the faces around her, saw people doing the math, weighing total destruction against partial survival. It wasn't a choice. It was a calculation of how much they could salvage from the wreckage. I'll do it, James said quietly. If it keeps the ranch, keeps the kids in their home, I'll do it. One by one, hands went up. 43 families agreeing to declare bankruptcy rather than let Margaret take everything. Margaret's response came through her lawyer. A statement released to the county newspaper dripping with false sympathy. It pains me to see so many families struggling financially. I extended credit in good faith, trying to help this community through difficult times. But a business cannot survive on charity alone. I've been forced to make hard decisions to protect my own financial stability. I hope these families find the support they need. Clara read it and wanted to scream. Margaret had positioned herself as the reasonable party, the victim of circumstances, while quietly orchestrating the destruction of dozens of families. She's going to get away with it, Sarah said. She'd been reading over Clara's shoulder, her voice flat with resignation. She's going to destroy everyone and walk away clean. Not if we can help it. But Clara didn't know how to stop this. Bankruptcy might buy time, but it didn't change the fundamental problem. Margaret held the paper on half the county, and she was willing to burn it all down to prove a point. The next week was chaos. Lawyers, paperwork, families trying to document assets and debts while facing the reality of financial collapse. Children heard their parents crying at night. Ranches went up for sale preemptively, trying to get ahead of foreclosure. The fabric of the community started tearing. And through it all, Margaret remained invisible. Didn't attend council meetings, didn't go to her store, didn't show her face anywhere Clara could confront her. She'd made her move and retreated, letting the consequences play out. Then Thomas got sick. It started small. A cough, a fever that Clara thought was just a cold. But it got worse fast. By the third day, he couldn't keep food down and his temperature spiked to 103. Clara and James took him to the county hospital, a 40-minute drive that felt like forever with Thomas whimpering in the back seat. The emergency room doctor was thorough but concerned. Looks like pneumonia. We need to admit him, start IV antibiotics, monitor his breathing. How long? James asked. 3 to 5 days if he responds to treatment. Longer if there are complications. They admitted Thomas to the pediatric ward, got him settled in a bed that looked far too big for his small body. He clung to Clara's hand, scared and feverish and asking when he could go home. Soon, baby, as soon as you're better. The hospital required insurance information. James filled out the forms with shaking hands, knowing their coverage had lapsed 2 months ago when he couldn't make the premium payment, knowing this would cost thousands they didn't have. The social worker who came to discuss payment options was kind but clear. They'd need to establish a payment plan or apply for financial assistance. Either way, it was another debt, another obligation they couldn't meet. It's fine, James told her. Whatever it costs, just make him better. Clara stayed with Thomas while James went home to be with the other kids. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, listening to machines beep and Thomas's labored breathing, and felt the weight of everything crushing down. This was what Margaret had done. Created a crisis so comprehensive that a sick child became a financial catastrophe. That medicine and healing came with a price tag families couldn't afford. Sarah showed up the next morning, having convinced James to let her skip school. She took one look at Thomas, pale and small and hooked up to IVs, and her composure cracked. He's going to be okay, right? The doctors say yes, the antibiotics are working, but we can't pay for it. Clara didn't lie to her. No, we can't. Sarah sat down hard, like her legs had given out. When does it stop? When does everything stop getting worse? I don't know. That's not good enough. Sarah's voice rose. You're supposed to know. You're supposed to have a plan. You told us to fight, told us we could win. And now look. Thomas is in the hospital. We're losing the ranch, everyone's going bankrupt, and you don't even know when it stops. She was crying now, angry tears that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Clara reached for her, but Sarah pulled away. Don't, just don't. I'm so tired of adults pretending they have answers when they don't. I'm tired of hoping things will get better when they only get worse. I'm tired of... She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. I want my mom. I want her here to tell me it's going to be okay. But she's gone, and nothing's okay. And it's never going to be okay again. Clara let her cry, let her rage, because what else could she do? The girl was right. There were no easy answers, no guaranteed happy endings, just grinding, exhausting uncertainty. When Sarah finally quieted, Clara said, You're right. I don't know when it stops. I don't know if we can win this. But I know we're still here, still fighting. Your mom would be proud of that, I think. That you haven't given up even when giving up would be easier. Would she? Sarah's voice was small. Or would she be ashamed that I let things get this bad? Your mother got sick and died, and she didn't prevent that. Does that make her a failure? That's different. Is it? She fought as hard as she could against something she couldn't control. You're doing the same thing. Fighting as hard as you can against Margaret, against debt, against a system that's rigged. The outcome doesn't determine the value of the fight. Sarah wiped her eyes. That sounds like something from a fortune cookie. Probably, but it's still true. Thomas stirred, his fever breaking for the first time in days. He opened his eyes, saw them both, and smiled weakly. Clara stayed? Of course I stayed. Promise you won't leave? Even when things are bad? Clara looked at Sarah, at this girl who'd just accused her of not having answers, and saw the same question in her eyes. I promise. Thomas fell back asleep. Sarah reached over and took Clara's hand, holding on like she was drowning, and Clara was the only solid thing in reach. They sat like that for hours, until James arrived with the other kids, until the small hospital room filled with the whole family, clustered around Thomas's bed like they could will him better through proximity. The doctor came by on evening rounds, checked Thomas's vitals, and smiled. He's responding well. Temperature's down, breathing's easier. We'll keep him another day or two for observation, but he's out of danger. The relief was physical. James sagged against the wall. Emma burst into tears. Even the twins, who'd been trying to act tough, looked like they might cry. Later, after the kids had gone home and it was just Clara keeping watch, she stepped into the hallway to call Mitchell. Any movement on the bankruptcy filings? Margaret's lawyer is fighting them, claims the filings are coordinated harassment, that the cooperative is manipulating members into bankruptcy to avoid legitimate debts. That's insane. It's also effective. If the judge believes there's coordination, he could dismiss the filings. Leave everyone exposed to foreclosure again. Clara closed her eyes. So we're back to square one. Not quite. The publicity is hurting Margaret. The state investigation is ongoing, and I've been digging into her business records. There might be something there. Inconsistencies in how she's reported income, possible tax issues. It's not much, but it's something. Maybe. Don't get your hopes up. These things take time. Time they didn't have. Clara thanked him and hung up, then stood in the fluorescent hallway of the hospital, trying to figure out what came next. A nurse approached. You the mom? Close enough. There's a woman here asking about Thomas. Says she's family. Margaret Fletcher? Claire's blood went cold. She's not family. Don't let her near him. She's pretty insistent. Says she has a right to check on her great-nephew. Thomas is not her great-nephew. She's the sister of his deceased mother, which makes her an aunt at most, and the family doesn't want her here. The nurse looked uncomfortable. I'll let security know. But legally, if she's not making threats, we can't force her to leave the building. Clara went to the waiting room. Margaret sat there like she belonged, dressed immaculately as always, reading a magazine. You need to leave. Margaret looked up, surprised. I'm visiting a sick child. Surely that's not a crime. You're not visiting. You're calculating. figuring out how to use this against us. You think very little of me. Margaret set the magazine down. I heard Thomas was hospitalized. Despite our differences, I care about Katie's children. I wanted to ensure he was receiving proper care. You care about control. About proving you were right, that we couldn't survive without you. Well, we are surviving. Thomas is getting better. We're still standing. Your plan failed. My plan? Margaret's expression hardened. I'm collecting debts that are legitimately owed. That's not a plan. That's business. It's revenge. You're destroying families because they dared to challenge you. I'm protecting myself from people who take without intending to pay back, who form cooperatives to avoid their obligations, who paint me as a villain for expecting basic financial responsibility. You set them up to fail from the beginning. Inflated prices, predatory terms. Prove it. Margaret stood, and they were face to face now, years of animosity compressed into the space between them. You've been trying for months to prove I'm this monster you've made me out to be. But all you've managed to do is turn this community against itself, destroy its economic stability, and put children at risk. I put children at risk? Who was watching Thomas when he got sick? Were you too busy organizing your little rebellion to notice a 4-year-old developing pneumonia? Were you too focused on destroying me to take care of the children you claimed to protect? The words hit like a slap. Clara felt the doubt creeping in, the voice that said, maybe Margaret was right. Maybe she'd been so focused on fighting that she'd missed what mattered. Then she remembered. Thomas had gotten sick on a Friday. She'd taken him to the doctor Saturday morning, had been monitoring him constantly, had brought him to the hospital the moment it was clear he needed more care. You're a liar. You twist everything to make yourself look right. I'm a realist. And the reality is that you're losing, Clara. The cooperative is falling apart. The bankruptcy filings are being challenged. In a month, half these families will be homeless, including the Whitlocks. Margaret's voice softened, became almost kind. You can still stop this. Walk away. Leave this family alone. I'll give James an extension on his debt, work out reasonable terms. The children stay in their home. Everyone survives. In exchange for what? You leave. Disappear. Stop interfering in matters you don't understand. Let this community heal without your influence. Clara understood then. This wasn't about money or control or even revenge. This was about Margaret's fundamental belief that she knew best, that her way was the only way, and anyone who challenged that deserved to be crushed. No. Then you've sentenced these children to homelessness. I hope your pride is worth it. Margaret walked out, leaving Clara shaking with rage and doubt in equal measure. Thomas came home 2 days later, weak but recovering. The hospital bill arrived the same day, $18,000. James looked at it and laughed, actually laughed, bitter and exhausted. Why not? What's another $18,000 when we already owe 41? Might as well go big. The cooperative met again, smaller now. Some families had dropped out, too scared or too defeated to keep fighting, but 30 still remained, stubborn or stupid or just too tired to quit. Mitchell had news. The state investigation found irregularities in Margaret's tax filings. Nothing huge, but enough to trigger an audit. It'll slow her down at least, make it harder for her to move aggressively on the foreclosures. How much time does that buy us? Maybe 3 months, maybe less if she's got good accountants. 3 months. It felt like both forever and no time at all. But something else was happening. The publicity around the mass debt collection was spreading beyond the county. Patricia had sent the story to state papers. A TV news crew from the Capitol had come out to interview families facing foreclosure. Margaret was becoming a symbol of corporate greed, of economic inequality, of what happened when one person gained too much power over others' lives. It wasn't the narrative she wanted. Her lawyer released another statement, more defensive this time. Margaret was just a small business owner trying to recover losses. She'd been generous for years. The debt collection was unfortunate but necessary. Nobody believed it anymore. The tide of public opinion was turning. Then the first settlement offer came, not from Margaret directly but through her lawyer. She'd accept 50 cents on the dollar from anyone willing to pay in a lump sum. It was more than people could afford, but less than they owed. It's a trap, Mary said. She wants to split us up, Get some people to take the deal, leave the rest hanging, or she's actually feeling pressure, Robert countered. Maybe she's realizing this is costing her more than it's worth. They debated for hours. Some people wanted to take the offer, desperate to escape the debt. Others refused, seeing it as surrender. In the end, 12 families took the settlement. 18 remained with the cooperative, too broke or too angry to compromise. James was one of the 18. He couldn't make the lump sum payment even at the reduced rate, which meant foreclosure was still coming. Clara lay awake that night, listening to the house creak around her, thinking about Margaret's offer. Walk away, and James gets an extension. The children keep their home. Everyone survives. All it would cost was her. In the morning, she drove to Margaret's house. A large Victorian on Main Street, perfectly maintained, showing no signs of the war being waged in its owner's name. Margaret answered the door herself, unsurprised. I wondered when you'd come. I want to discuss your offer. They sat in a living room that looked like it had never been lived in. Antique furniture, expensive rugs, everything positioned for show rather than comfort. You're willing to leave? Margaret asked. I want to know exactly what you're offering. Details. Legally binding terms. Margaret pulled out a document, already prepared. James's debt is restructured. 20-year payment plan at 3% interest, manageable monthly payments. He keeps the ranch. The children stay in their home. And you leave, today. Never contact the family again. Clara read through the contract. It was legitimate, generous even by normal standards. James would be able to meet the payments. The ranch would be safe. And the other cooperative families? Not part of this deal. Their situations are separate. So I save one family by abandoning everyone else. You save 7 children from homelessness. That seems worth it. Clara thought about Thomas in the hospital bed, about Sarah crying that nothing would ever be okay, about Emma and David and the twins and their desperate need for stability. Thought about James, who'd been drowning for so long and finally found something to hold on to. She could give them safety. All it would cost was everything she'd built, everyone she'd helped, the community that had come together around the idea that they didn't have to accept Margaret's control. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow. After that, the offer expires and foreclosure proceeds. Clara drove back to the ranch, the contract on the passenger seat like a bomb. She found James in the new barn, working on stalls even though they didn't have enough cattle to fill them anymore. He looked up when she entered, read something in her face. What happened? She told him everything. The offer, the terms, what it would cost. James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You should take it. What? The kids need stability, need a home. If you leaving makes that happen. He stopped, gathered himself. Katie would tell me to take the deal, to protect the children no matter what. And what would she tell me? That you've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. That you came here to be a housekeeper and somehow became the center of a revolution you never signed up for. That it's okay to walk away. Clara looked at this man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, who'd become something like family through shared struggle and stubborn hope. What do you want me to do? James met her eyes. I want you to stay. Want the kids to have someone who fights for them, who shows them that standing up to bullies matters even when it's hard. But I can't ask you to sacrifice your place here for a principle. That's not fair. Since when is any of this fair? She left him in the barn, went inside where the children were doing homework at the kitchen table. Sarah looked up, suspicious. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Clara went to her room, closed the door, and stared at the contract. Tomorrow, she had to decide. Save this family by abandoning them, or stay and watch them lose everything. There was a knock. Emma, small and serious. Can I come in? Of course. Emma climbed onto the bed, sat with her legs crossed. Sarah said you might have to leave. Maybe. Because of Mrs. Fletcher? Yeah. Emma was quiet, thinking. Then she said, Mom used to tell me that the hardest choices are the ones where both options hurt, where you can't pick the thing that makes everyone happy, so you have to pick the thing you can live with. Your mom was very wise. Are you going to leave? Clara looked at this child who'd lost her mother, who'd learned to survive grief by making herself small, who'd slowly been learning to take up space again. I don't want to. Then don't. We'll figure out the rest. We always do. It was the simplicity of it that broke something loose in Clara, the uncomplicated faith that they'd survive because they had so far, the refusal to let fear make the choice. That night, at dinner, Clara told them all. Mrs. Fletcher offered me a deal. If I leave, your dad gets better payment terms on the debt. The ranch is safe. The table went silent. 7 faces, waiting. I'm not taking it. Why not? David asked. If it saves the ranch. Because it doesn't save anything that matters. It saves the building and the land, but it destroys what we've been fighting for. The idea that we don't have to accept her terms, that we can stand together and demand better. Even if we lose? Sarah's voice was careful. Even if we lose, because some things matter more than winning. Marcus, who rarely said anything serious, spoke up. Like family? Like family. Thomas crawled into Clara's lap, settled there like he belonged. Good. I don't want you to go. That night, Clara burned the contract in the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash, felt the weight of the choice settle onto her shoulders and decided she could carry it. Tomorrow she'd tell Margaret no. Tomorrow, the war would continue. Tomorrow they'd face foreclosure and debt and uncertainty, but tonight they were together, imperfect and struggling and scared, but together. And sometimes that was enough. Margaret's response to Clara's refusal came not with words, but with action. The foreclosure notice arrived by courier at dawn, clinical and final. 30 days to vacate the property. No extensions, no negotiations, no mercy. James read it at the kitchen table while the kids ate breakfast. His face going blank in that way Clara had learned meant he was shutting down rather than feeling too much. Dad? Sarah's voice was small. It's fine. We knew this was coming. He folded the paper like it was ordinary mail. We'll figure it out. But there was nothing to figure out. The math was simple and brutal. They had no money, no way to pay, nowhere to go. In 30 days, 7 children and 2 adults would be homeless. Clara watched the kids go through the motions of getting ready for school, saw how they'd learned to function while everything fell apart around them, and felt rage burning through her grief. Margaret had won, not through superior strategy or moral high ground, but through the simple fact that she had resources and they didn't. Money, as always, got the final say. After the school bus left, James went out to the barn without a word. Clara found him an hour later, just standing there among the half-built stalls, staring at nothing. We should start packing, he said. Get ahead of it. Make it easier on the kids. We have 30 days. Why drag it out? Why make them watch us scramble and fail? Better to just accept it and move on. Clara wanted to argue, but what could she say? That hope would save them? That fighting mattered even in defeat? The words felt empty against the reality of that foreclosure notice. She left him there and drove into town, not sure what she was looking for, but unable to sit still. The cooperative was meeting at Mary's place that afternoon, but Clara almost didn't go. What was the point? They'd lost. Margaret had systematically destroyed their resistance, and now she was collecting the spoils. But she went anyway, because sitting home felt like dying. The meeting was smaller than ever, 15 people, looking exhausted and defeated. Mitchell was there. His usual professional composure cracked around the edges. The bankruptcy judge denied the coordinated filing, said there was evidence of manipulation, that the cooperative had encouraged members to avoid legitimate debts. Margaret's lawyer was very convincing. He rubbed his face. I'm sorry. I thought we had a chance. So that's it? Robert's voice was hollow. We just lose everything? Unless we can pay, yes, the foreclosures will proceed. Most of you will lose your land within 60 days. The room fell silent. These were people who'd farmed the same land for generations, who'd believed that hard work and community meant something. They were learning that sometimes it didn't, that power and money mattered more. Mary spoke up, her voice shaking. What about the state investigation, the tax audit? Moving forward, but slowly. Even if they find wrongdoing, it won't stop the foreclosures. Different legal systems, the different timelines. Mitchell looked around the room. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I have to be honest about where we stand. People started leaving, one by one, until only Clara and Mary remained. She destroyed us, Mary said, systematically, methodically, and she'll face no consequences because everything she did was technically legal. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it effective. Mary stood, gathered her things. I'm going to sell before the foreclosure. Try to get something out of it, at least. Start over somewhere else. I suggest you tell James to do the same. Clara drove home thinking about starting over, about what it meant to rebuild from nothing, about whether she had the strength for it anymore. She'd come to this ranch with 2 suitcases and no options. She'd leave with the same, apparently. Full circle, except now it hurt more because she'd learned what she was losing. The house was quiet when she got back. James still in the barn, the kids at school, nothing but silence and the ticking of a clock that Katie had loved because it had belonged to her grandmother. Clara walked through rooms she'd cleaned and organized, past walls she'd repaired, through a kitchen where she'd fed 7 children and watched them slowly come back to life. This had been a job. Somewhere along the way it had become a home. She was sitting at the table when she heard the knock. Not the front door, the back one, the one only people who knew the family used. Patricia stood there, her reporter's bag over her shoulder, her expression grim. We need to talk. They sat in the kitchen over coffee that neither of them touched. Patricia pulled out a folder, set it between them. I've been investigating Margaret for months, following the money, talking to people, digging through public records, and I found something. Clara looked at the folder but didn't open it. If this is about tax irregularities, we already know. It's not enough. It's not about taxes, it's about fraud. Patricia opened the folder, showed Clara page after page of financial documents. Margaret's been running 2 sets of books, one for the IRS, one that shows the real numbers. She's been skimming profits, hiding income, inflating expenses. For years. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in undeclared income. That's felony tax fraud, wire fraud, racketeering if we can prove a pattern. This isn't a civil matter anymore, Clara. This is criminal. Clara stared at the papers, trying to process what Patricia was saying. How did you find this? A former employee, someone Margaret fired 3 years ago for asking too many questions. She kept copies of everything, just in case. Gave them to me after she saw the articles about the foreclosures. Said she couldn't watch Margaret destroy more lives. Will this stop the foreclosures? Not immediately. But if the FBI gets involved, and they will once I publish this, Margaret's assets could be frozen pending investigation, including the debt she's trying to collect. It buys time, maybe enough time for the courts to sort out what's legitimate debt and what's been manipulated through fraudulent accounting. Clara felt something like hope stirring, dangerous, and fragile. When can you publish? That's the problem. My editor is scared. Margaret's threatening a massive lawsuit claiming everything we've printed is defamation. He's worried about legal costs, about the paper going under if Margaret fights back hard enough. He won't run this unless I have ironclad corroboration. Multiple sources, forensic accounting, the works. That takes time. How much time? 2 months minimum, maybe 3. The foreclosures happen in 30 days. Patricia nodded, frustrated. I know. I'm trying to speed up the process. But journalism takes time when you're accusing someone of federal crimes. One mistake, and the whole story collapses. Clara looked at the documents, at the proof that Margaret had been breaking the law while destroying people's lives in the name of legitimate business. It was everything they needed and nothing they could use. Can I make a copy of these? Why? Because if journalism takes too long, maybe justice doesn't have to. Patricia studied her for a long moment. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Margaret's dangerous when she's cornered. She's been dangerous from the start. At least now we have ammunition. That night, Clara called Mitchell from her room, door closed, voice low. I have evidence of fraud, serious fraud, the kind that could get Margaret arrested. She heard him shift, papers rustling. What kind of evidence? Financial records showing she's been running 2 sets of books, hiding income, manipulating expenses, years worth of it. Where did you get these records? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. If they were obtained illegally, they're inadmissible. Could actually hurt our case. They came from a former employee who kept copies, voluntarily provided to a journalist investigating Margaret's business practices. Mitchell was quiet, thinking. That might work. I'd need to see the documents, verify authenticity, find a forensic accountant to confirm what they show. But if it's real, this could change everything. How fast can you move? Give me a week, maybe less if I push hard. Clara spent that week watching the days tick down on the foreclosure notice while Mitchell worked. James had started packing, slow and methodical, boxing up Katie's things that he'd finally been able to look at again. The kids moved through the house like they were already ghosts, saying goodbye to rooms and memories. On the 8th day, Mitchell called. It's legitimate, all of it. I've got a forensic accountant who's willing to testify. The fraud is extensive and well documented. I'm filing an emergency motion to stay all foreclosures pending investigation of the underlying debts. Will it work? I don't know, but it's a chance. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later in county court. Mitchell advised them not to get their hopes up. Emergency stays were rarely granted. Judges didn't like disrupting legal proceedings already in motion. But the courtroom was packed when they arrived. All the cooperative members, dozens of townspeople, reporters from 3 counties, even a crew from the state news. Word had spread about what they were attempting, about the evidence they'd found. Margaret sat with her lawyer, perfectly composed, but Clara saw the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't a town council meeting she controlled or a business negotiation she could manipulate. This was a court of law, and the rules were different here. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Harriet Morrison, listened to both sides present their arguments. Mitchell laid out the evidence of fraud, showed how it called into question the legitimacy of every debt Margaret was trying to collect. Margaret's lawyer argued that debt collection and accounting practices were separate issues, that even if fraud existed, it didn't invalidate contracts people had freely signed. Clara watched the judge's face, trying to read which way she was leaning. Impossible to tell. Finally, Judge Morrison spoke. I'm going to grant a temporary stay on all foreclosure proceedings related to Fletcher's General Store. 60 days while the State Attorney General's office investigates these fraud allegations. If they find sufficient evidence of criminal activity, we'll revisit the underlying debts. If not, the foreclosures proceed as planned. Relief hit Clara like a wave. 60 days, not freedom, not victory, but time. Margaret stood abruptly and walked out, her lawyer scrambling to follow. The courtroom erupted in conversation, people crying and hugging and trying to process what had just happened. James found Clara in the crowd. Did we just win? We just survived. Winning comes later. But that night, the ranch felt different. The kids laughed at dinner. Sarah smiled without it looking painful. Thomas asked if they could get more chickens now that they weren't leaving. Clara sat on the porch after everyone went to bed, looking at stars that seemed impossibly bright, and let herself feel something she'd been afraid to touch for weeks. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The state investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Patricia's article finally ran, front page, detailing everything the forensic accountant had found. The FBI got involved. Margaret's bank accounts were frozen. Her assets were seized pending the outcome of the investigation. Within 2 weeks, criminal charges were filed. Tax fraud, wire fraud, racketeering. Margaret Fletcher, pillar of the community, was arrested in her own home and perp walked to a police car while news cameras rolled. The town watched it happen in shock. Some people felt vindicated. Others felt like they were watching their world collapse. Margaret had been a villain, yes, but she'd also been a constant. Knowing what to expect, even when it was bad, felt safer than stepping into uncertainty. The arraignment was quick and brutal. Margaret pleaded not guilty, was released on bail, and immediately disappeared from public view. But the damage was done. Her empire had crumbled overnight. With Margaret's accounts frozen, her ability to collect on debts evaporated. The foreclosures stalled. The cooperative families found themselves in limbo, still in debt, but to a creditor who was facing decades in prison and couldn't legally conduct business. Mitchell worked with the state to sort through the mess. Which debts were legitimate? Which had been inflated through fraudulent accounting? Which people had been manipulated into agreements they couldn't afford? It took months. Long, bureaucratic, frustrating months of lawyers and accountants and court hearings. But slowly, a picture emerged. Most of the debts had been artificially inflated. Margaret had charged prices far above market value, then provided credit at exploitative rates, ensuring people stayed trapped in a cycle of dependency. The court ruled that debts would be recalculated based on fair market value for goods and services received. For most people, that reduced their obligations by 60% or more. James's $41,000 debt was recalculated at $16,000. Still substantial, but manageable over time. The ranch was safe. The cooperative didn't just survive, it thrived. With Margaret gone, other businesses moved in to fill the gap. Competition brought prices down. The trading network expanded. The weekly gatherings became a permanent farmers market that drew people from 3 counties. Mary opened a small store specializing in local goods. Robert started a consulting business, helping other communities establish cooperatives. The cooperative became a model, featured in agriculture journals and economic studies as an example of community resilience. But none of it felt like the victory Clara had imagined. Margaret Fletcher took a plea deal. 15 years for tax fraud and racketeering. She'd be eligible for parole in 7. The woman who'd tried to destroy them would eventually walk free, and that felt wrong somehow, like justice was partial at best. Clara went to the sentencing hearing. She wasn't sure why. Some need to see it end officially, maybe, or to understand what she'd been fighting all this time. Margaret looked smaller in the courtroom, older, diminished in a way that went beyond the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. When the judge read the sentence, she didn't react, just nodded like she'd expected it. As they let her out, Margaret's eyes found Clara's. For a moment, they just looked at each other, 2 women who'd gone to war over different visions of how community should work. Margaret didn't look angry anymore. She looked tired, and maybe, underneath everything else, a little relieved that it was finally over. Clara felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, not triumph, something closer to sadness, for what Margaret could have been if she'd used her power differently, for the community she could have built instead of the kingdom she'd tried to rule. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Clara asking for statements. She gave them nothing, just walked to her truck and drove home to a ranch that was finally, truly theirs. The months that followed were about rebuilding, but differently than before. The barn went up again, bigger this time, with space for the expanded herd they were planning. The garden tripled in size. Solar panels went on the roof, a cooperative project that several families did together to reduce costs. Sarah got accepted to the state university with a scholarship. She'd be studying business administration, planning to come back and help run the cooperative after graduation. The girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast had found a way to turn that pain into purpose. David took over most of the ranch work, discovering he had a talent for animal husbandry. The twins mellowed slightly, still troublemakers, but creative ones who channeled their energy into building things instead of destroying them. Emma became the cooperative's unofficial photographer, documenting their growth. Thomas, still small but no longer quite so serious, started kindergarten with a confidence that came from knowing he was loved. And James came back to life slowly, started making plans for the future instead of just surviving the present, laughed more. One night, Clara found him looking at the photograph of Katie that had been turned to the wall for so long. "I think she'd be proud of us," he said, "of what we built from what she left behind. I think she'd be proud of you for not giving up on them, on yourself." James looked at Clara, really looked at her. "I couldn't have done this without you. You know that, right? You saved us. We saved each other." It was true. Clara had come to this ranch expecting to save nothing but herself, to find a place to exist until she figured out what came next. Instead, she'd found a family that needed her as much as she needed them. Had learned that belonging wasn't something you waited for, but something you built, day by day, through showing up even when staying would have been easier. A year after Margaret's sentencing, the town held a harvest festival. The first one in a decade, people said. The cooperative organized it, turning the town square into a market and celebration that drew hundreds. Clara walked through the crowd with Thomas on her shoulders, watching neighbors trade goods and share food and laugh together. Saw the community that had emerged from the ashes of Margaret's control. Messier than what came before. Less orderly, but more alive. Patricia found her near the apple cider stand. Good turnout. Better than expected. I'm doing a follow-up piece. 1 year later, where are they now? Want to give me a quote? Clara thought about it. About everything that had happened, everything they'd survived, everything they'd built. Tell them it wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to accept that someone else got to decide our worth, our options, our future. We didn't beat Margaret Fletcher because we were smarter or better. We beat her because we wouldn't stop believing we deserved a choice. Patricia smiled. That's good. Can I use it? It's yours. That night, after the festival wound down and the kids were in bed, Clara sat on the porch with James, watching the sun set over land that had been saved not by luck or destiny, but by simple, stubborn refusal to quit. What are you thinking about? James asked. Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that I ended up here. You regretting it? Clara looked at the house behind them, lit from within, filled with voices and laughter and life. Thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that bus 8 months ago, desperate, alone, expecting nothing but a paycheck and a place to sleep. She'd found so much more than that, had found purpose and family and a reason to fight, had learned that home wasn't a place you arrived at, but something you defended, day after day, against everything that tried to destroy it. No regrets. Not one. Even when it got hard? Especially when it got hard, because that's when it mattered most. James reached over and took her hand. Not romantic exactly, just connection. Acknowledgement that they'd been through war together and come out the other side still standing. Inside, someone laughed, Sarah probably, telling a story that had the twins in stitches. Music was playing, something upbeat and hopeful. Through the window, Clara could see Emma dancing with Thomas, spinning him around the kitchen while David rolled his eyes but smiled. This was what they'd fought for. Not victory over Margaret, though that had been necessary. Not even saving the ranch, though that mattered too. They'd fought for this. For ordinary evenings filled with ordinary joy, for the right to exist without permission, for the freedom to be imperfect and struggling and still enough. Margaret had believed that control created stability, that people needed someone strong to make decisions for them, to protect them from their own poor choices. She'd built an empire on that belief and used it to justify every manipulation, every threat, every act of cruelty. But she'd been wrong. What people needed wasn't control, it was agency. The ability to make their own mistakes, build their own solutions, create their own version of community, even when it was messy and uncertain. The cooperative wasn't perfect. People still argued, still made bad decisions, still struggled with money and weather and all the practical challenges of farming in difficult times. But it was theirs, built by their choices, sustained by their effort, belonging to everyone equally. That was the real victory. Not defeating one woman, but proving that another way was possible. Clara stood, stretched, felt the ache in her back from hours of festival setup and the deeper satisfaction of work that mattered. I'm going to bed. Early morning tomorrow. Tom wants help with his new calf. James nodded. Clara? Yeah? Thank you for staying, for fighting, for showing us we were worth fighting for. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just squeezed his shoulder and went inside. Her room was small and simple, unchanged from that first day except for the photographs she'd added to the walls. The kids at various ages, the garden in full bloom, the new barn raising, the cooperative's first official meeting, a life documented in moments that added up to something bigger than survival. Clara changed into pajamas, climbed into bed, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. They still had debts to pay, challenges to face, uncertain futures to navigate. But they'd do it together. As a family, as a community, as people who'd learned that the hardest battles were worth fighting not because victory was guaranteed, but because the alternative, giving up, giving in, letting fear decide, was worse than any defeat. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing that tomorrow would bring new problems and new possibilities in equal measure, that Thomas would wake her too early, wanting breakfast, that Sarah would argue about something, that the twins would break something they shouldn't touch, that James would need help with ranch work, and the cooperative would need organizing, and life would continue in its complicated, exhausting, beautiful way. And Clara Whitlock, who'd arrived at this dying ranch as a last option no one else wanted, would be there for all of it, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. The fight against Margaret Fletcher had taught her many things, but the most important was this: belonging wasn't given. It was chosen. Every single day, in 100 small ways, people chose to show up for each other. To stay when leaving was easier. To fight when surrender was safer. To believe that community mattered more than comfort. Those choices added up. They became the foundation of something stronger than any empire built on control and fear. They became home. And home, Clara had learned, was worth every battle it took to defend it. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. Inside, 7 children and 2 adults who'd been strangers once upon a time slept under the same roof, held together by something more powerful than blood or obligation. They'd been broken. All of them. By death and grief and a woman who'd wielded power like a weapon. But broken things could be rebuilt, could become stronger in the places where they'd cracked, could hold more weight because they'd learned what it meant to nearly fall apart. The ranch was quiet now, settled into night. But it was the quiet of rest, not emptiness, of peace, not defeat. And in the morning, when the sun rose over fields they'd fought to keep, they'd be ready for whatever came next, together.